We'll call the meeting to order. Would we all stand for the pledge, please? And I'll lead us. Please follow me. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Director Vallejo.
Here.
Director Heyman.
Here.
Chairman Kaczynski.
Here.
Director Page.
Here.
Vice Chair Gleason.
Yep.
All right, we're ready for public comments. This time is reserved for the public to address the board on matters not on the agenda. No action will be taken on non-agenda items unless authorized by law. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. Do I have anybody from the public who would like to make a comment?
I would like to bring it to your attention that we still do not have a finance committee. The public deserves this. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Pat Ferris. We've had a rough ride for the last few days, and things are quieting, and now it looks like a good time to try to learn what we can from what has happened from the scientific aspect. I did get this recently from Dr. James Jacobs, hydrologist that I've been working with for some time, and I intend to make copies, and I'll get this to you if you like. This was published in December 7, 2011, about earthquakes, water as a lubricant. Geophysicists have established a mode of action that can explain the irregular distribution of strong earthquakes at the San Andreas Fault in California. The scientists examined the electrical conductivity of the rocks at great depths, which is closely related to the water content within the rocks. From the pattern of electrical conductivity, I can't say that word, and seismic activity, that they were able to deduce that water acts as a lubricant. So I know we're trying to find out more about about the status of our water is, and understand more about what we have available. And I'm not going to read this, but some time back I sent a copy of this to most of you, I think, about some research that's being done about water that's being stored in the granitics. It says, water is as crucial to the workings of Earth's interior as it is to the Earth's surface processes. Among other things, it triggers magma generation beneath volcanoes, lubricates deep fault zones, and fundamentally alters the strength and behavior of the Earth's mantle. And a recommendation at the end of this paper, this was done by Nature. I'll be through here. I can't read the name of the group that puts this out, but they said that a comprehensive understanding of inputs to Earth's interior will require drilling of the faults that are thought to be conductive or to be conduits for water into the conduits of water. So I know we're looking for every bit of information that we can to better understand what we have here, but I think with this recent disturbance, it may give us some other ways to look at what maybe we might find about, especially about water stored in the rocks and the faults. And so we're reading more about that all the time. It's not new research, but it's being looked at more and more. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments for the public? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda. We have approved the minutes of board meeting of June 20th, approval of resolution number 04-19, appointing Camille Anderson as the PAC representative for Searles Valley Minerals, and C, approval of the expenditures. And Don, did you have a comment on the expenditures?
Sure. Staff is looking for, similar to the board action taken last month where we pre-approved these invoices. You'll recall we did receive a DWR reimbursement, and since then we have paid all the invoices that were on the consent agenda last month, with the exception of the one Stetson invoice for $104,000 plus. So we still have that invoice, which doesn't show up on this for approval. It's already been pre-approved. What we're looking for, we do have funding to cover all the invoices that are on here, with the exception, again, of the Stetson invoice, $99,947.96, but we're looking for pre-approval. So when we do get the second reimbursement from DWR, which we're hoping possibly in August to get that, we can go ahead and pay those without waiting another month. So again, we're just looking for pre-approval. We will be able to pay items 1 through 1, 2, 5, and 4.
Thank you. As I understand it, you had a few questions from DWR, and they've been answered back on the invoice, and so we still expect something in August, hopefully early August.
Yes.
And Stetson, you're agreeable?
Yes.
All righty. Thank you, Steve. Any other comments or questions for the board on the consent agenda? Hearing none. Anything from the public? Hearing none, I'll ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll move.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you. Okay, I'll call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Hearing any opposed? Hearing none opposed, the motion passes. Thank you. All right, next is board review and approval of the Well Intel invoice and discussion on how to proceed. Don, I understand that you have a report on that here.
Yeah, there's a staff report in your packet. I'll just go over it briefly. The invoice was on the consent agenda last month for the board to consider and approve. Was asked to carry it forward to this month for discussion. In the interim, there was a ad hoc committee appointed members of the TAC to review the proposal and the data that's been collected since then. My understanding is, I wasn't on the call, but the ad hoc did meet. Their discussions are continuing, but in the interim, I've talked with Water Resources Manager. You'll recall last month, Jeff Helsley was sitting up here and did see value in the data, although he did say that it wasn't necessary at this time for development of the GSP. We have since talked. Recommendation is we're entering the high pumping season, if you will, through the summer, and I think we see value in continuing to collect that data at least for a year, and then for the Water Resource Manager to at that time reassess the value of that data to see if perhaps some of the locations where the Well Intel technology was installed was all voluntary. So there may be locations that strategically aren't the best for collecting the data that the Groundwater Authority would like to see. So at the end of that 1 year, evaluate the technology again, look at where that's installed, If there's areas where it makes sense to continue to collect that data, to do so. The areas where perhaps the data isn't quite as valuable, could offer to those who have it installed to continue at their own expense, and then reassess where to better place the well and tell equipment. So we're looking for direction from the board. Again, this is not a budgeted item. There's no money in the budget to pay for this. The cost, as you see in the staff report, including tax and shipping, if you decide to go forward for that 1-year testing period, would be $12,461.64. That does include the 1-year data services as well. So it's all inclusive for that amount. Going forward, if the board decides after 1 year, the water resource manager recommends to continue with the program, it's $2,000 for the data services program annually. And then there's a replacement of the battery. Battery life is 5 years plus typically, and the sounder battery life, I think it's $50, $54, and the sounders are like $60 to replace those. There is a fee if you have Well and Tell come out and install those, but according to them, anybody that has a well probably has the basic knowledge to replace it themselves, so they wouldn't have to incur those costs, or the GA wouldn't have to incur the costs. So.
Okay. The only question I have, this recommendation is both by Stetson and the TAC ad hoc committee. Everyone's involved with this. This recommendation comes.
TAC ad hoc did not reach a decision. As a citizens and staff
report,
their discussion is their discussion was continuing.
Okay.
The recommendation comes from myself and Stetson.
Okay. Thank you. Does the board have any questions or comments? I'll open it to the public.
Good morning. I'm Don Decker. I was one of the 2 TAC ad hoc members who actually participated in the telephone conference. The other person was Tim Parker. The one thing that I have brought up repeatedly, and I brought it up again at the ad hoc meeting, is that Well and Tell has put a lot of effort, and it really does show, into their dashboard and their presentation of data. What's missing from their effort is a concentrated effort on traceability and calibration. The word NIST, for example, National Institute of Standards and Technology, does not appear in their manual once, nor does certification. And so, although you can collect data, the question is, what do you actually have? The tried and true pressure transducer well logger is in use right now in this basin in some critical wells, and the additional data that comes from Well and Tell is more of a interest, I would say, to the private parties who actually have those wells. And I'm sure that those individuals have learned some things about their well that they otherwise didn't know. But as far as the GSP and the data that we actually need to go forward, or even data in the near term, in the next year or two, we do not need the Well and Tell data. And the fact that it does not have a proper certification chain means that it would not be suitable for an evidentiary hearing if and when we actually go to court. That's my comment for you.
Any other comments? Come on down.
Judy Decker. My comments are, you have said over and over again that you're short of funds. We have, for the last 30 plus years, used the services of Kern County Water Agency, to which every property owner in this valley pays taxes. They come out twice a year and collect data from the same wells over and over again. It's the data that you get over time which is going to be valuable, not data that shows at 1 o'clock the well dropped 2 feet, and at 4 o'clock it rose a half a foot or something like that. I would urge you to use that $12,000 plus more wisely. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Skip Gorman, a well owner and resident of Ridgecrest. Wanted to drop a little bit of data your way with regard to well intel. A few months back, Lee Knutson and I attempted to install one on my well. I was enthusiastic to get interesting data, and we failed. The peculiarities of my system, I think because we had to sleeve the well recently, frustrated our efforts to get a straight shot down into the shaft. Well intel needs that. I suppose by modifying the top plate that holds the whole shooting match in place would need to be taken off and a new hole drilled closer to the center line. It may have worked. I like the idea of having well intel installed because it goes in quickly. It seemed inexpensive. It was bright and shiny technology. Wow. And there are circumstances that don't make it entirely appropriate perhaps to every well. I'd love to see what sort of installation fuss its competition would demand. So I'll volunteer my well. If you want to volunteer a warm body in a system, I'll watch carefully. Let's wait till fall when it's not so darn hot. That was my input. Thank you, my friends.
Thank you, Skip. Any other comment from the public? Hearing none, I'll bring it back to the board. Any more discussion? Yes, Bob.
Yeah. I was curious whether staff, in making the recommendation, had considered what Mr. Decker brought up in terms of certification of the technology and whether it was defensible or usable.
I wasn't on the call either. I actually wasn't on the call. Don says he wasn't on, I wasn't on the call either, but just the best response, I think, Bob, is that I'm sure it's true, and I don't think I think the way Don presented the staff report is accurate. We see value in the data, using the data. I don't think we'd ever anticipated using the data in the event we do get into a legal issue as far as, like Don mentioned, like evidentiary hearing. I don't think we intended to use it for that. I think it makes a very, very good point that if going forward beyond what we're talking about here, that needs to be done, that we need to get the validation and certification and make sure whatever data we use in this basin, it needs to be something we can count on as accurate data and can be used for whatever purposes we need. This was really, going back on it, I think most people remember, this was really sort of an offer of a test run. And I think from Peter Brown, who was the chair, he tried it on his well. So it was a test run, and they offered to do it at no cost and get out there. And like we said, we do see some value in the data. It's always great to have data, but we don't need it for the GSP. It's not important for us to get the GSP done. And if we do go forward, yes, there would be a relook at what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, and make sure it's valid data. So, yeah.
So I believe what we would be doing is if we proceed to use this in the future, we would negotiate with them, where do we want them? Do we want them here? Do we not want them here? What additional costs may be, as well as the requirement that they get certified in some way or another. Okay.
If I could follow up on that. If we don't need it for the GSP, what is the tangible value for us moving forward?
It is providing information on the well and the aquifer and how the aquifer reacts. There are other wells in the area where these are located where you can see how the groundwater levels react to other wells pumping. So there's aquifer information that's there that's always useful. You're really kind of in a position where you have the equipment in place. And to stop what you're doing now means to pull it out. So we're kind of looking at it like, is it better to leave it in place and use the data and then look at enhancing its use in the future, or do you abort the whole program right now?
Well, that's my question. How are we using the data then?
We're not using it for the GSP. It's just going into our database. It's just additional information. And we do anticipate that, as Don mentioned, with the pumping season coming, we would anticipate being able to look and see what the impacts of the water levels in the area are to some of the other the heavier pumping that goes on in the area. But direct use on the GSP, it's not intended for that.
And I don't believe it ever was.
Ever was.
Ever was. We exactly what you said is the reason we put in so we can see the effect when pumping starts and when it slows down on particular wells.
Yeah.
And I know they made an attempt to get it distributed as best they could
Right.
with people who voluntarily
Exactly.
said,
This really was a demonstration.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Bob?
I just was wondering if the other members of the board would I have a suggestion in terms of how we proceed with this and other items. We've got a couple other items that all seem to be somewhat related because of, they come to the question of, do we have enough money to do these things? This isn't in the budget. There's a later item regarding the severely disadvantaged communities program and whether we have the money to front in order until we can get reimbursed. And we've got a finance report. I don't know whether it makes sense to hold off on giving specific direction on this and the severely disadvantaged item until we can receive the finance report.
Did you have another comment?
No.
Well, I feel this way, that if we're going to sit there and say, well, this depends absolutely on the finances, then we already said it's not a budgeted item. I feel it's something that we encouraged to happen. We agreed that it would happen. The ad hoc committee says we are gathering. There will be data available, or it helps us, especially in these times of pumping. That I believe we need to continue with this. Where we move it to for a vote, that's fine with me. If you guys want to move it down farther, we can. But I don't see where it's going to make a lot of difference.
Yeah, if I could clarify, the reason why I suggest that is that, to me, if we've got two items that do require some money, it would be helpful to kind of evaluate the impact that both could have and not separately. Because right now, until we get through the discussion on the severely disadvantaged, my inkling is that the severely disadvantaged programs potentially provide more benefit to the management of the basin than this does at the moment. But we haven't gone through that discussion yet. So that's kind of why I was wanting to have the full discussion before I could weigh, do I think we should move forward with both? Do I think we should move forward with one?
I have no problem with that. The rest of the board wants to just hold off on this item until after item. Let's see, where is that, Bob? Finance is 9. Yeah, until after
Mr. Chair,
that.
you also have the ability to move up the financial reporting before the SDAC, and that might be the best thing to do right now.
I think what Bob is asking, though, is that we have discussion on both of the SDAC projects and the finances before we discuss this further. Am I correct?
So you would table the well intel issue, and then you would have the financial report, move it up to right now, and then at that time you would have heard the financials when you discuss the severely disadvantaged community projects.
Yeah, as I understand this item and the SDAC items is that the staff is seeking direction from the board.
Right.
There's no specific
Okay.
recommendation or resolution. They're seeking direction, as I understand it, on how to move forward. So I just feel like in order to give direction on both of these items, I'd like to have the finance be part of that discussion so that we can then give direction on both once we've discussed all that.
So, Jim, your recommendation is we just go ahead and move table this, move the finance up, discuss.
And then come back and pick up the well intel, and then go into the severely disadvantaged community items. That's the cleanest way, I believe.
Do I need to vote on that?
No.
We just move ahead. There's any problem with the board? We'll go ahead and table this. We'll move the finance discussion, which is number, again, where is it again? 9. Move that 9 up. And at this point, too, I think I would like to make the point that we would also like to move the the water resource manager report to from number 8 down to just after general manager's report.
Yes, that was my request. Thank you.
That was your request?
Thank
So I just remembered that. So as a board, if we have no problem with that, I'd like to do that as well. All right? So with that, then, we'll go ahead and table the discussion on the well intel invoice, and we'll go ahead and move up to the update on the finances.
Okay, this will be a two-part report. First of all, we have the monthly report for June finances, and then, as the board requested, we'll be presenting a pro forma. I'll be presenting the monthly June report, and our CFO, Ty Stahaley, is here, and he'll do the pro forma we put together. As far as the June report, again, this is in the format that we've been presenting so far this year. Moving down our ending balance sheet, we've updated through the expenses. The cost of the POAM has been updated. So we are at a balance right now of $88,251. And as I mentioned earlier in the consent agenda, you can see the outstanding invoices, unpaid invoices at the bottom of the report. The one for Capital Core, City of Ridgecrest, the 2 DRI, and the RWG Law. Those total $65,596. I'm sorry, $956.04. And to pay those off will leave us a balance of $22,301.27. So again, we'll be holding off on paying the 2 Stetson invoices, the most recent one and the one that was pre-approved last month. We do anticipate, again, the second invoice from DWR reimbursement coming hopefully early August. At that point, we will be able to pay the 2 Stetson invoices and hopefully any other invoices that come through between now and then. Any questions on the June report?
Yeah, and I know you haven't gone to the next page yet, but it says the ending balance on this sheet is $88,257, and then the pro forma shows an ending balance through June of $45,697. So I was wondering what the difference is there.
I'll have to defer to Ty.
Okay, I think that if we get both reports, and so we can get those explained, we'd be better off.
What's that?
I think if we do both reports, if we go ahead and do
yeah.
the pro forma,
Sure.
and we discuss these in conjunction.
Okay.
Do you have anything else, Tom, on the finances, or do you want to turn over to Ty for the pro forma? You ready for Ty?
Yes.
Okay.
Unless there's any other questions from the board on the monthly report.
Well, I think we want to combine. It looks like they're going to have some questions that are going to overlap. Okay.
All right. Ty Staley, CFO of the Water District. I guess just to start off and answer that first question of the balances being different. What was I used for the June fiscal year to date through June numbers was through the last report, so it actually doesn't reflect the current report here. That's why you'll see a discrepancy. In fact, on the pro forma, I inadvertently put the grant money we received in June. I put it in the July bucket on accident. But okay, what we have is the pro forma.
Yeah.
This is to take us through June of next year. Looking at what we have approved for the 2019 budget, working with some of the staff from Stetson to kind of get estimates on what we think monthly expenses will be, taking into account our past performance on revenues as the pumping fee and projecting that out into the future. This does not include any of the in-kind services from the Navy that was included in the 2019 POAM budget, since those are in-kind services. We also took out the SDAC funding because we haven't had a direction on that yet, so this does not include any expenditures or reimbursements based on the SDAC grant. Going through this, you can see when we projected for our grant reimbursements on the revenue side being in July, which should be June, another one in August, October, January, February. Pumping fee, we have the line going across. Expenditures, remember this is also a pro forma, so we don't know exact performance, but this is our best guess. Kind of looking at how we end up at the end of each month. We're looking at July of being an ending balance of a negative $102,000. This would be invoices such as the Stetson ones that we're deferring. We go positive in August after we get the reimbursement and stay that way until we hit November and December, again going negative, just based on the workload that we're doing to complete the GSP. Should also note what is not in here is reimbursement of the $500,000 loan from the county or repayment of the City of Ridgecrest reimbursement. But this gives us an idea of when we could start expecting to do that. We start having a positive fund balance in January through June, though our revenues and expenditures really don't keep up until we hit May. There you can see we're actually bringing in more revenue than we're expending. Brief, down and dirty, presentation of this pro forma. So
Well,
go ahead and ask questions.
Yeah, like any estimate like this, or you're looking into the future, you do your best estimate as to including the pumping fees and all.
Right.
But we do have a bit of history on that you can use in that. And I'm assuming that you worked with Stetson on and probably look at the POAM and costs there to bring out those costs. So I would see that this could be refined. As we move along, it'll be refined.
Right. I mean, these sort of documents are outdated the moment you publish them. I mean, you've already got new information, obviously.
Right. Exactly.
We'll point out the pumping fee have been adjusted from the forecast that was put together earlier this year, because we are seeing a shortfall every month. So we took that into consideration, adjusted the pumping fee.
Okay.
Especially in these heavier months, since we didn't start the pumping fee until I think it was September of last year.
Yeah.
So we don't have real good information on the big heavy pumping months.
Okay.
Kind of took a more conservative approach to what we'd be receiving, but kind of accounting for the percentage and differences we've been receiving all along. So
I would hope that in any calculations like these, you're conservative in on the income estimates, and you're also on the conservative side for expenses, meaning you went to the higher side of the expenses.
Exactly.
That you knew. So we're looking at a worst case scenario. So what I see from this is that, and this is what we were asking, is that if and when, as pumping fees continue, what is it going to take to pay out the GSP, which to me at this particular point includes the payback to Kern County, as well as the one that the City of Ridgecrest is requesting. Okay, so I mean you can add that in here, but then it takes that bottom line, just makes it negative $500,000 roughly.
Right, and this is not accounting for any reserves either. I mean, what you see at the end, the total $258,000, that is completely what you'd have left in the bank. That is your reserve.
That is the reserve.
If you will, yeah.
Okay, all right. And it's hard to estimate, based on what's going to happen in the plan, what pumping fees are going to look like past that time as well. So,
I mean, we have some idea.
Have some idea?
Going with historical, but yeah.
Okay. All right. That's all the questions I have. Bob, I'm sure you have some.
No, that was my main one, was trying to balance those numbers.
Okay.
My main question was trying to balance those numbers. And at first I said I was wondering why the City of Ridgecrest reimbursement was zero, but then I realized there was another line item for the meeting costs that they're getting reimbursed monthly on. So I kind of figured it out.
If we were to ask you to put those reimbursements in here in future years, you could.
Yeah.
And it would show.
We didn't, mostly because we don't have direction from the board on how much we want to actually.
Because whether to be paid in lump sum, a little bit at a time, things like that. Okay.
Well, lump sum would be really hard.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. Okay. Is there any other comments or questions from the board on both the monthly financial and the pro forma?
So, thanks.
Yes.
If I understand this pro forma correctly, we are actually projecting a positive fund balance, ignoring the reimbursement issues, in approximately a year.
Correct.
So in theory, there is some money to spend if we're ignoring the reserve requirements.
Yes.
And we're ignoring the reimbursement request.
Right. Or delaying them, not ignoring them.
No, not ignoring it, delaying. Yes. Yeah.
Imprecise word. That's maybe another question. Is the Stetson and are the Stetson invoices projected to be paid in this pro forma budget?
Yes.
Okay. Have we had any conversations with the city and with Kern County about their expectations?
We had correspondence from the county, so we know they're expected to be paid back as quickly as we can.
I had a call with Alan Christensen I think it was last week, and presented this to him. This is what he requested to present to, to the Board of Supervisors. Didn't get any feedback, but he just asked for this document to be presented so they have some expectation. He did say during the call it was their expectation that they wouldn't begin receiving something until perhaps next year. So I think that's in line with what we're seeing here.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other comments, questions from the board? Hearing none, I'll open up to the public.
Don Decker again. In looking at the both the pro forma and your monthly budgets, the outstanding Stetson balance is due that are due here and now. It seems to me that you have no question whether you can or should spend $12K roughly on Wellintel. If you really have $12K to spend, it ought to go on to Stetson's invoices.
Any other comments from the public?
Judy Decker. I think I've asked this before, but since the money man is here, I'll ask him. The water district customers are all paying a usage fee through the water district. The big ag, and hopefully some of the small ag, are paying a usage fee, a pumping fee. The city of Ridgecrest has wells. Are they paying a pumping fee? Yes. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Raymond Kelso. I represent part of the public. I just got this sheet out there on the desk, and what catches my eye is the $2.5 million that are going to be spent or has been spent. I'm not quite sure how all this works, but $2.5 million is a big number. And my question is that in mitigating the overdraft, which is what this whole thing's about, at least in my opinion, is how much water have we saved so far? Could you give me a number in acre feet after spending $2.5 million, what this has done for the public and for the future of our kids? Anybody want to take a shot at that? Thank you.
Well, I can take a shot at it. This is money spent on the plan. This is not money spent on implementing specific programs at this point. We're spending $2.5 million to collect data and to develop a sustainability plan, and then you will see those kind of benefits going forward once that plan has been approved and vetted with the public.
That's a good explanation. However, it'd be nice to see where the money has went so far and how that goes towards the goal. Thank you.
Stan Rotora. I notice here that starting in February of next year that there's no change in expenses or in income. It was my understanding that once we submit our GSP, we're going to start working on projects. It was also my understanding that once we submitted the GSP, we would revise our finances to accommodate not only those projects, but also hiring a staff, namely a general manager, maybe a finance manager, maybe a lawyer, etc. And I see nothing in here that would indicate that we're going to start doing any projects or that we're going to actually hire a general manager or that our finances are going to change to accommodate either of those. So if you could sort of indicate why there's nothing in here that I guess would indicate that we're actually going to do anything come the fact that we get the GSP.
The numbers with regards to staffing or an administration for the GA are not in there because they haven't been developed yet. The goal is to have something developed by November for that. We didn't have time to put that together, obviously, last month, and it's going to take some time to do that. So that's why they're not on there.
I can appreciate the fact that you haven't had time to do it, but then that should have been one of the going-in assumptions is we haven't had time, it's not included, and this really doesn't represent what we're going to be spending come any time after January of next year. It's misleading, I guess is what I'm saying, because this is not what we're going to be spending, I don't believe. I don't see how possible it can be.
I, for one, don't appreciate the word misleading. I will tell you that if you were here at the last GA meeting, we did discuss this, and the direction was that they develop, or maybe it was the previous one, that they develop a pro forma based on what is it going to cost to get the plan submitted. Then the next time, then we would move on from there to develop exactly what you're talking about. So yes, we're putting it together. It was not requested to be in this pro forma. This pro forma was strictly so we can see how the outcome is of all the grants, all the in-kind, everything that's happening to get the plan to the state. And that's to keep that, purposely to keep that separate.
And as long as that's clear.
Yeah, and we are working on those other numbers, which our deadline is November.
Okay. And as long as that's clear, I appreciate what you're saying, but that wasn't made clear. Anything after February just is not realistic, because we're going to have to make those changes. And it may not be till November, but we need to be clear to the public that that is the case. Thank you.
And I'll say it one more time. We are doing that, so I hope that's clear to the public. Thank you. Any other comments? Hearing none, I guess we'll move ahead. Jim, we don't need a vote or just an approval on this. It was just a update, correct?
No vote needed.
All right. So now we can move on to the discussion and board direction to staff on severely disadvantaged communities with water audit, leak detection, and repair program. That's number 5 on your agenda.
Okay, there is a single staff report for both of the STAC programs, both the rebate program and the water audit, leak detection, and repair program. Just as a way of the background, the Prop 1 funding that was awarded to the Groundwater Authority included monies for 2 disadvantaged community projects. The RFPs were advertised in 2019 in April, and this was following the revised budget. The discussion was put off because of the budget was being put together. We weren't sure that we would have funding to pursue these, because it became clear that we did have to front money. Initially, we thought that there would be no requirement to pay in advance, but that changed the complexion of these grants. So after that was discovered and we moved forward, they did issue the RFPs. We did have proposals for these programs last month. They were presented to the board. There were 3 for the leak detection and 1 for the rebate program. And there was direction from the board to have an ad hoc committee review the proposals and make recommendations. The ad hoc committee did meet, and their recommendation, again, the ad hoc committee consisted of water resource manager, the 2 committee chairs from TAC and PAC, Chairman Kaczynski and myself. We looked at the qualifications, the experience, and the approaches that each of those proposals presented. The recommendation from the committees was for WaterWise Consulting for the rebate program and for the California Rural Water Association for the audit and leak program. We've gotten more information since the staff report was put out. There was some concern initially about timing with cash flow and everything because we were getting in crunch time to actually start these programs and actually make significant progress on them in the time by the deadline that the state had made us aware of. We did make an inquiry initially to the DWR, and we're told that perhaps a couple of months could be extended, which still was not practical. But we've got some follow-up. Heather can report on her call with DWR and what they said as far as extending the deadline under certain circumstances.
Yes, I've been in contact with our DWR rep Jennifer Wong. Like Dawn said originally, she said they could be open to extending the deadline by a few months. Just to recap for you, our deadline in the Prop 1 grant is March 2020 for these SDAC projects. But since then, this week, I've been in contact with her and explained more of our cash flow issues and certainly the earthquakes now, how this all plays into what we can and need to do for these SDACs. And she, this is unofficial, but she indicated it seemed likely that we can get approval for an extension to the end of 2020, which would be a 9-month extension. The approval process, though, for that, we have to funnel everything through our DWR rep. The person who can make that decision and approve that is one level above her program manager. So we'd have to submit a request, and she can process that.
And just to say, we're thinking that we could get an answer to that by the next board meeting, just for the board's information.
Excellent.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't want to imply, though, with this extension, that means we can wait until after the GSP has been submitted before we can start this program in order to still have a meaningful program and meet the objectives. But this extension can certainly help alleviate some of those problems.
Yeah. And actually, my question, it comes off of that point, because I was wondering where the March 2020 deadline came from, because logically to me, if this money is for implementing programs and we're still planning the programs for our still developing our GSP, I just always in my head assumed this money would be spent once we adopted the GSP. So when I saw in the staff report the 2020 March deadline, yes, it made me scratch my head as to logically why that made sense to the DWR, that we would just go out ahead of completing our analysis of what would best manage this basin and just start doing things.
Hi, Jeff Helsley with Stetson. When we put the application together, the DWR guidelines indicated we might get pre-funded for this program. So the schedule we would put in had been actually to do these SDAC programs in parallel with preparation of the GSP. The original hope was, and we've identified these as pilot programs, we'd conduct these while we were preparing the GSP, and we'd actually have them done and have some at least initial results before we finish the GSP. We'd incorporate that into the GSP and say, well, this was successful, we want to continue it or not, or modify it, take whatever we learn and put it in the GSP. That's why the ultimate deadline that was in our funding agreement was March 2020, because we originally thought we'd be pre-funded and we'd do them together and use that information.
Thank you.
Just one other quick thing. We just went through the finances, so you know that we have cash flow issues going forward. The fact that DWR is not going to upfront fund this program means that we would continue to have cash flow programs because these folks would need to get paid. But we have had some communication with them, and we would be our goal would be to bring that communication, the final results of those communications with the consultants, whoever it might be recommended, to possibly delay their invoices to match our cash flow. In other words, give us a 90-day invoicing period or something like that. So yeah, this doesn't help the cash flow issue that we already have, but we have contacted the consultants, and most of them have indicated willingness to work with the board. So,
yes, Bob.
So in terms of the cash flow issue, for these two programs as they were envisioned when we put out the RFP, and based on the responses we received, and the two vendors that you're recommending that we go with, what are the expenses up front that we would have to get reimbursed for? I mean, are we funneling all money through these two vendors, or are, like in the rebate program, is there an expectation that we are paying for the amenities that will be, water efficient fixtures and things that would be put into potentially people's homes, and they're not having to come up with any money? Or, I'm trying to figure out how much money we would have to spend to initiate this program.
Right. You brought up the rebate program, and that's an important point because the original intent was the members of the public in the SDAC would purchase and install the water conservation devices themselves and then apply for the rebate program, and then we'd get the refund from DWR to pay the contractor through that. But we have been told through consultation, I can't recall now if it was through the TAC or just board members and staff, that the members of the SDAC communities can't afford to do that up front and then wait for the rebate. And so our program is modified slightly to say that we would be covering those costs up front and then applying for the reimbursement from DWR.
Now, on the severely disadvantaged leak audit detection, that was the one vendor, correct, that submitted? No, two vendors submitted for that.
There were three vendors.
I'm sorry, three vendors. Yeah, and have we discussed, and it seems to me we're almost combining the two of them, the rebate program and such, because we sort of had the same results in terms of requirements for the timing on these.
Yes, they're packaged together.
Yeah, so I wanted to make the comment that the vendor under the rebate program, as I understand it, that they would basically be upfront and if someone qualified for new fixtures or such, that would all be paid for by them, and they in turn would bill us.
Yes.
Is that how that would work?
That's the revision to the program now.
Okay.
Actually, for the repair program, would it be similar in terms of the Rural Water Association would kind of try to identify where potential money could be spent, but the actual owner of the infrastructure would have to?
Jeff might be able to answer that.
No, this program, they would go through the vendor would go through all three steps and do all three. They'd do the water audit. They would then do a leak detection program on a system, and then they would have some funds to go through and actually do the leak repairs. That's part of the grant.
I'm assuming the amount of money in that program is not enough to fix all the leaks within this basin, as well as the system in Trona that's taking water from this basin. So how would the vendor prioritize how to spend that money?
Well, I think the water audit and the leak detections themselves would give them some data on where the money could be best spent, and they would look at that. And certainly, especially now, there's not enough money in that program to fix all of the leaks.
So would they be making the analysis themselves, or would people who, either mutuals or Searles Domestic Water Company or other, small cooperatives, would they be making a pitch to the vendor to be considered? How would that work?
The conclusions of the water audit will come to the GA. That work will be done with the disadvantaged community with the system. And then the information will come to the GA. Then they'll do the leak detection, and then that data will be reported, and their conclusions on that will be reported to both the SDAC system and to the GA, and that will have the recommendations on where to do the leak repairs that we can all look at and discuss before they move forward.
Okay. One last question related to the earthquake and the declaration of the emergency. Where has that? I know there are stages of emergency declarations in terms of potential reimbursement for government agencies, infrastructure, and at the very end is whether or not individual properties are qualified. Has that emergency declaration gotten to the point where individuals or potentially these mutuals or cooperatives might be able to, if they had damage as a result of the earthquake, might be able to fix some leaks as well?
I can't answer it. Mick, do you have an input?
I know I'm supposed to be with Cal OES this afternoon at like 1 o'clock, and those conversations are going to occur. But right now, I don't think we are.
Okay.
But I'm not sure.
But I do believe, like any other government entity, it's going to be moving like molasses. Well, maybe not. Maybe not. Depends how fast you can get it moving. We are a small community here, and I think they're looking favorably on us. Anything else? Any other questions? So I guess the guidance you're looking for, Steve, is to.
Well, does the board, first of all, does the board wish to pursue these? We're looking for a recommendation to go ahead and proceed. If so, we'll get back with the vendors and again address the cash flow issue with them, maybe get a revised scope, and come back to the board in August. What's that?
With DWR's answer.
Oh, with DWR's response about.
To help me answer that question, I don't see anything in the. I know in previous agendas we've been told how much these grants are, but I don't see it in this background here. Remind me how much money we're talking about having to potentially.
The grant amount for the two programs is about 640 something thousand.
646. Yeah.
646.
No match requirement.
Okay. Yeah, with no match. The comment I want to make is that I believe that we need to move ahead with this. It's for this disadvantaged community. It gives us an opportunity to improve the water usage, and I think it would be a mistake at this time to just say we're not going to be able to continue. Again, it depends on the formal response we get from DWR, and again, I'm hoping they're going to look favorably on us, especially with the earthquake issue when it comes to leaks and how affordable everything may be. So I guess, Steve, what you're asking is that we be prepared for the August meeting to actually approve the contracts with these based on the DWR response and further negotiations with each of them on timing for payments and things like that?
Correct.
Okay.
So again, we're looking for direction to accept the recommendations of the Ad hoc Committee for WaterWise and the California Rural Water Association.
Okay.
Pursue negotiations with them.
Yes, Bob?
I just was going to say that I'm comfortable with keeping this moving forward and working with DWR and with the committee's recommendations as to who we would contract with.
Okay, thank you. Jim, do we need a motion to proceed with this or just a direction from the board?
I think the direction from the board is sufficient right now, and then they'll bring back the action next month, and at that time, there might be board action.
Okay. So do I have any other comments from the board before I turn over to public? Any comments from the public, please?
Judy Decker again. I think many people have been on vacation, and as they come home and survey their dwelling after the 4th of July weekend, you are probably going to have a lot of people who do have leaks, who have broken pipes, and I don't know where you're going to be dividing just the people who had leaks in general with the people who perhaps had damage with the earthquake activity that we had. I know we took a drive on Sunday and went over into Searles Valley, and there's lots of places where there's standing water north of 178 from the leaks that occurred from the ruptured supply line that goes through Poison Canyon. This is something that I think you as a board should consider looking at addressing also. Perhaps not with the GSP, perhaps with a side issue. You have a community that has a real water problem over there. Thank you.
Sophia Merck. I concur with what Judy just said. But talking about severely disadvantaged communities in this area, I want this board to remember that there is a community in this area, and we haul water. We're bulk water haulers, and we're severely disadvantaged. And nobody talks about that in our area. We're older. We're over 65 years of age for the main part of us. There's 29 water haulers right now, legitimate water haulers. And it is difficult for us. We're being asked to pay more for 100 cubic feet than anybody else in the valley. We have to pay up front. We don't get the proper billings. And so we are disadvantaged, both physically and age-wise. Thank you.
Any other comments from the public? So I'll just bring this back to the board. So I guess I feel like we're talking about 5 and 6 together to move ahead. And so if I hear no objection from the board, I would like to go ahead and assign the staff to continue as planned.
My only comment is I think this is probably, these two programs are probably programs we would look to have implemented regardless of Sigma. It just seems like a best practice in a basin like this to make sure you're not having waste of water. But I think it would be good to follow up both with Inyo County to see if there's any issues there that we can address, in San Bernardino County, in Kern County, to see what efforts we're making to separately assess whether or not the earthquake and the related emergency has caused problems that can be reimbursed through emergency funding that don't have to necessarily burden our overburdened budget at this point.
Thank you. So hearing no objections, I guess we're ready to move on. All right. So we'll move on to, I guess we're on item 7 now. Board discussion approval of resolution number 05.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, I'm sorry.
You tabled item number 4,
that's right.
so we should get closure on that before moving on.
Thanks for reminding me. In fact, I have it right here in front of me. Yes, it'll bring us back to the well intel discussion. So, Bob, do you have any further insight on that now?
My initial questions, Bob deferred to me, thanks, Bob, would be to make sure that our TAC is comfortable with the reliability of this information as compared to any industry standards that might be out there, because I have heard a question about that, and to decide what tangible function that this will provide to the GSA moving forward, or tangible information that we can, or information that we can use in a tangible way, to make sure that we are spending money wisely. Because although we apparently do have some money in the future, we only have that money if we're ignoring our earlier directives to have a reserve, and we're obviously not accounting for reimbursement obligations that we have. So, in my mind, I would like to see this come back with that information. One being, does the TAC agree with the reliability of this information? 2, are we going to have a tangible use for it? And 3, is there a need for it, or is there a space for it in our budget that's a higher priority than something else that we don't currently have yet to pay for? I don't feel comfortable with the state of those questions not being answered at this point to have a recommendation one way or another.
My belief on that is twofold. One is Stetson already recognized that the fact that if this is a one-time expense, this won't continue unless a recommendation from Stetson comes forward on and how it will continue and what format it will continue in and what requirements will be. And the second thing I want to make a point of is one thing that Will and Till did. We had that in mind, and I think Peggy made the effort when she was here at the last meeting to state that this was part of an effort to get the individual well owners to participate in the program and understand that they can learn something as well. And one thing I don't want to see happen is all of a sudden yank the carpet out from underneath those who felt that this was something that could benefit themselves and the process as well, and say, oops, we don't want to continue there. I think it's a small cost to pay to pay for the investment that was made of and plus the 1 year. We're only talking 1 year here. To keep that up and continue to refine it, look at it, and see where it's best going to help us. Just because it isn't be part of the plan, it's part of the overall view of what we are doing here. And I think it's important that those people out there that have participated in it, and I know that Lee has talked to a number of them as well that couldn't at the time. So we were getting some kind of input and some kind of cooperation, and I think that's a very important thing to consider. Any other comments from the board?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Appreciate it. John, I appreciate your comments. I think they have a lot of value. Mr. Stetson, Mr. Johnson, what's the value to what we're doing here with this $12,000 to you and the GSP? And if not valuable to you directly to the GSP, is there value to the GSA in terms of post-GSP development? Because I would like to say yes to this. I want to say yes to this. I want to approve it. I think it's $12,000 that gets the community engaged. Yep. There's a lot of intangibles that add value to what we're doing, and although they're not directly related to the GSP, can be beneficial down the road.
Right. Keeping in mind the cash flow, I think those are the primary reasons you would say yes to this. As we said before, this is not something that we need to do the GSP. It's not going to be a part of the GSP that we prepare. We see the information, we collect the information, we're involved in it. We do see the potential that in the future, if the program is left in place in the future, it could be enhanced. It could be enhanced to do other locations and certifications and the verifications of the data. We see the potential for it to be enhanced. But I think the justification, I think you've mentioned the primary justifications for it, and the only concern that we have right now really is the cash flow issue. So yeah.
Okay, I'm going to be inclined to agree with this thing based on your words about potential. $12,000 for some potential is maybe a worthwhile investment. So I'm going to support it.
One thing I might add, and it's just a consideration, the proposal was for a 60-day pilot. The equipment has been in service since late March, early April. So Wellintel has worked with the GA, and we're continuing to gather data, even though technically the 60-day pilot project ended probably a month ago. Just a consideration.
Thank you, Don. With that, I'm going to ask for a motion to approve the payment of the invoice and the plan for 1 year of data collection.
So moved.
Here, a second?
Second.
Any other comment from the board? With that, I'll ask for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
I'm going to abstain.
All right, one abstention. Motion passes. Thank you. Okay. Boy, I got arrows all over my agenda, going moving this from here to here. So, all right, so correct me if I'm wrong again, Jim. I believe we're on item 10. If I'm not mistaken.
7.
I'm sorry, 7. Thank you. Board discussion approval of resolution number 05-19, Capital Core Group to process and submit application for Water Smart Grant.
All right, I guess this one's mine. There's a staff report and a proposed resolution in the board packet. This is really an outshoot of what happened at the last board meeting on June 20th last month. The board went ahead and authorized Capital Core Group to go ahead and pursue a Water Smart grant. The Water Smart grant, as you recall, provides 50% matching funds for all described as water marketing activities. And the contract that the Groundwater Authority already has with Capital Core Group authorizes the expenditure of $130,000 already that can be used as matching funds. So there's no financial impact in that regard because that money has already been budgeted. There is a little bit of a financial impact. It's my understanding that in order to prepare the actual application, that Capital Core is going to redirect about 30 hours of work that was already authorized, and that saves about $6,000. Stetson will have to also be involved in the process of preparing the grant application, and that's an estimate of maybe $2,000 or $3,000. And then if the grant is awarded to the Groundwater Authority, it's estimated that there may be an additional $10,000 to $15,000 in administrative costs, progress, final reports, invoicing, those types of things. So in that regard, a resolution from the board is required to be included in the grant application that's being prepared by Capital Corps. It's very basic. It basically says that the Groundwater Authority supports the submission of the application for the water grant, that the general manager is authorized to enter into any type of agreements that are required, and that the Groundwater Authority has the ability to pay the matching funds, which we do. And the last one, that will work with the Bureau of Reclamation on a timeline. And that's pretty much the substance of the resolution. I'd be happy to answer any questions. John?
Just in terms of the budget numbers, worst case scenario, if I understand it correctly, and just please confirm if I'm correct or if I'm mistaken, the downside of this essentially would be the loss of hours that we've already allocated to Capital Corps Group for some other functions, and the cost that we would incur for Stetson's participation in the grant application.
That's correct.
So we're looking at essentially $3,000 up to $3,000 of actual
new money.
costs. Okay.
Bob?
It was mentioned at the meeting last month when this was originally put forth to the board, and you just repeated this, that Capital Corps would be able to do this work to complete the application within its existing hours and its scope of work. But I haven't heard what they're going to reduce in their scope. Do we know yet, or is that still to be determined? You know, what tasks within the scope of work are we going to shave 30 hours off of?
I would defer to Jeff. Has that been determined yet?
I believe they told us when we were here last time when we gave approval to move ahead, sort of, but I don't remember what it was.
I don't recall either. There was a specific portion of their budget that they identified.
Well, if I could ask our general manager then, that once that's figured out, if you could communicate that with the board.
I think Todd shook his head that was from Jeff that we got the information, yeah.
Okay. The other question I have is regarding some language in the resolution that would authorize the general manager or his designee to execute the grant agreement should we receive the money. I'm not real comfortable with authorizing or delegating our authority to delegate. I understand the potential need to have a backup person to sign that agreement if Don's not available and there's a deadline. But it's always my preference that when the board is asked to delegate its authority to approve something, that it actually identify who's it's giving that authority to, and not some potential person that we allow Don to pick who that could be.
Jim, do you have an answer to that?
Most of this resolution was a form that was provided to me, and there was information in the reclamation grant package. I don't have a problem if you get rid of or as designee and we just authorize the general manager. That would be fine.
Okay.
And we would revise the resolution accordingly.
Yeah, I mean, that's my preference, or if there's another person you think should be able to execute it, we could add that position in as well.
We had nobody in mind.
Okay. That would be my recommendation, is to approve the resolution with, my motion would be to approve the resolution with that amendment to delete or his designee.
Okay.
Do you want a second?
Let's get a second.
Second.
I do want to open up for comment, take this time to open up for comment to the public, since we have a motion in a second, if we have any. All right, hearing none, I'll just bring it back to the board for a vote. And I take it this is a voice vote, Jim?
I'm sorry,
is this a voice?
Roll call vote resolution.
Roll call, yes.
Director Vallejo?
Aye.
Director Heyman?
Aye.
Chairman Kaczynski?
Yes.
Director Page?
Aye.
Vice Chair Gleason?
Yes.
All right. So it looks like.
Can I answer the questions? Yeah.
Oh, did you get it?
I did.
Oh, you got an answer.
Tatum
Okay.
from Capital Corps.
Then we can clear that up.
There'll be a little bit taken from Task 1 and also from Task 3,
Okay.
which is both the initial water assessment, Task 1, and Task 3 is the funding.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Now we're on to the agenda item. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, down there, 10. adopt ordinance number 01-19.
Correct.
Right, I'm getting past all my notes. Mandatory well registration, first reading.
Okay, I guess this one's me as well. At the last board meeting, staff was directed to start the process for requiring all wells within the basin to register. The board may recall that when we did our first ordinance last year relating to the rules and the procedures for the groundwater extraction, as well as the requirement that non-de minimis well owners register their wells, in the initial ordinances, there was language that was going to require all well owners to register their facilities. That was taken out during the board meeting, and we did not impose that requirement at that time. Since then, we've undertaken outreach efforts, including working with the Domestic Well Owners Association to try to get de minimis well owners to register. I think we sent out 4,000 postcards or something like that, and we had a total of 1 registration as a result of that. So outreach and asking for voluntary registration isn't really getting us anywhere. So based upon that, staff determined that the best thing to do would be to go ahead and adopt an ordinance that's requiring all well owners in the basin to register their wells by October 1st. And before I go any further, there's a couple of changes that I'd like to suggest in the actual ordinance itself. Prior to the meeting, Phil, myself, and Keith had a discussion with Derek Hoffman. Derek thought that the use of the phrase private groundwater extraction facilities was misleading, possibly, or created some ambiguity. So we all decided that it would be okay if we deleted the use of the word private throughout the ordinance. And the reason it was in there, you'll recall that when we had the ordinance last year, that required all non-de minimis pumpers to register. And so this one here is trying to pick up all of the de minimis well owners and have them register. So we would get rid of the all reference to the word private, which is found in the title, sections 3, 4, 3 and 4, and just delete the word private. Under section 4, the very last full sentence, under number 7, and any information that the authority's general manager, that should be changed to the water resource manager. If you read throughout the ordinance, everything's done to the satisfaction of the water resource manager, so he should be inserted in place of the general manager there. And then here's the last suggested revision, which really arose out of the deleting the word private, and we would add this on to section 8, and it would be a new sentence that would state, likewise, comma, if you receive groundwater from a public purveyor, you do not need to register. And those would be the only suggested revisions that we have to the ordinance at this time. Just from a procedural standpoint, we would be looking for a motion, 3 parts at this one. The first part of the motion would be that the board would make a finding that that this action is exempt pursuant to CEQA, and the code sections are referenced on the staff report. The second act would be reading the full title of the ordinance and introducing it, and the third would be waiving the reading of the ordinance, and then scheduling the reading for the second reading of the ordinance at the August board meeting. That's all I have at this time. I'd be happy to address any questions.
Any questions from the board?
Mr. Chairman, does that also mean that we would delete the word private from the registration form itself?
Yes.
In all areas?
All references to private would be deleted.
Any other comments from the board before we proceed? I'll open up for public comment.
Judy Decker. I have two questions. The one is, how are you going to know if you have everyone registered? And the second one is, how are you going to enforce this?
Does anybody want to venture an answer on that?
I forgot what the first question was.
I probably did too.
How do we know we have everybody?
Yeah,
Well,
how do we know? How do you know you have everyone?
Well, we will continue to work towards trying to get full registration. Unfortunately, we don't have a list of existing wells that we're able to just check off as we get registration. So the effort to identify wells and to have them register is going to be an ongoing process that will continue, into the future until we can get all wells registered. We don't have a procedure or process laid out how we're going to do that, but this is the first step to require it, and we'll just continue to work towards it.
And if existing well owners do not register their wells by October 1st, 2019, what will happen?
I think that we'd have a discussion at the staff level and take back the options to the board to see what the board would want to do at that time. We would look at whatever remedies were available to us, and then we would discuss those with the board and proceed accordingly.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Jim, may I ask you a question concerning just a clarification? You said that if you receive water from a purveyor, you do not need to register. If you receive water from a purveyor but have a well also, are you not required to register that well?
All wells are required to be registered.
Then you may want to clarify that just a little bit about receiving water from a purveyor. That statement you made.
We can put, if you receive water from a public purveyor and do not own an additional well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mead.
Hello again, Skip Gorman. I don't know why, but I'm sensitive to well registration simply because it's the one element of the GSA that has to be profoundly finessed. Right off the bat, the request for mandatory well registration probably shouldn't be written by a lawyer. I'm guessing perhaps a poet.
Some of us can do both.
There you go. I believe from you, yes. I ask that anybody who's taking notes and may be empowered to adjust the request may want to simplify the registration form a lot from what we first were given in the fiasco at Inyo Kern Senior Center a year or so ago. I'll speak slowly because I think slowly. There were a lot of questions on the registration form that people found confusing and frustrating, and it ended up informing the extent to which they wanted to respond to it at all. It has to be very simple. Later, perhaps years from now, when you need more information, you can ask that. I'd like to see the form itself, the information you want back, to evolve into more data, perhaps, in more detail. But right now, ask for something general, something large. Do you own a well? What's your address? Phone number. Also, the well registration data taking, should have a single point of contact on your end and staffed well enough so that a phone gets answered by a live human being and someone's empowered and knowledgeable to respond to the call. I would like the data of well registration to be publicly read-only viewable, and mistakes that were taken easily correctable. I know as well as anybody listening that this registration's phase one of a 3-step process. Register it, tell us how much you're pumping, step 2, and oh, by the way, here's what it'll cost you, step 3. If we make mistakes going in, once things become mandatory, we at this end have lost control of it. A question popped into my head. Do we need, and I'll ask that before that light goes out, do we need this data before the GSA is issued? Is it required this year? And that's it. You don't have to answer that now. We'll talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have another question. How are you going to inform all the private well owners, all the well owners, that they need to register their wells by October 1st? You have sent out 2 postcard mailings. The second one was abysmal. We know of over 50 people who did not get it. The entire domestic well owner board did not get one. So if you can't get your postcards mailed to the well owners, how are you going to inform them that they need to do this with a deadline of October 1st?
I guess you're waiting for an answer.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah, but it's just like everything else. This isn't the time to answer that. It's something we're going to have to work on. We've tried, obviously, with the postcards, the mailings, and everything else, and we're just it's a continual process. That's all I can say.
October 1st is a little over 2 months away.
Yes, it is.
I don't think you gave me an answer.
I don't know if we have one.
Don Decker. You all are aware of the difficulties that are basically historical in contacting the rural community here, and that same exact issue or aspect has happened over and over again. That's why there's a de minimis category. You're dealing with a territory that doesn't have a really good boundary or definition. The rural community here has been really sensitized with the past attempts by this board to reach out to that community. Skip Gorman expressed it quite nicely. In that sensitivity is a deep feeling that this board is spinning wheels. And I submit to you that this mandatory registration will have essentially no effect, the effect that you wish it could have, that is to have a significant number of de minimis well owners registering as a result of it. I submit it is not likely to happen. In fact, it will result in an even more entrenched resistance.
Pat Ferris. I think this has been a serious lack of concern based on fairness. And I shouldn't say lack of concern. I don't think you're not concerned, but if I remember correctly, Lorelei Oviatt said she knows every well in this basin. Could the county some way help us with the names of those well owners? And we do know there's going to be some resistance. And the fact that you only got one answer after that one mailing should speak volumes to what kind of cooperation you're going to get unless we have another kind of approach. But is there a way to get a list of all the well owners from the county? Could you answer that, Mr. Gleason?
Yeah, go ahead. I thought we had those.
I think we have a list. We know all well owners. We have a ministerial process that people have wells. They register their wells with the county, and we have that list dating back to sometime early in the 1980s.
Well, why is that not accessible?
That is accessible, but it's not a registration form that has sufficient information on it to do the job we needed to do with this registration form. So we have that list. We can bounce the registration form off that list, but we need to register these wells within the SIGMA process so that we can understand the water consumption. And right now, we don't have that information. All we have is a name and a well. We don't have how much water they're using, and we don't know.
But if we have the name, we wouldn't have to send out cards to everybody in the, in the whole basin. It would seem that would it be helpful to just address that request to the people who by name, to request that they register their well? Would that be more?
Please do.
That's exactly what we're doing.
Okay.
We have a list of names. We're going to use that list of names to bounce off the list that we're sending out, and we'll match them up.
So how many total wells?
If you know it.
I don't have a number of wells.
Okay. I can understand the frustration that you're experiencing.
I'm not experiencing frustration.
Well, we are. So, thank you.
Thank you. Nick Panzer, Ridgecrest resident. I'd like to respond a little bit to what Skip Gorman said and Don Decker. When I read the form to register, I was impressed with the amount of thought that went into it and the kind of data, because I looked at it and said, this is exactly what I think the GA needs to equitably regulate pumping by private well owners in light of all other domestic users of water. Over 30,000 other people use water in their homes. You can't make them meter, you can't make them report, but you can regulate them, as I read SIGMA. And I think that's going to have to be done. With 800 private wells at 2 acre feet, they can't be left there. That's way too high a percentage of our natural recharge, the only assured water we're ever going to have. Sure, there's going to be a resistance, and it'd be nice to have poets, but it's got to be done. And I think you've made an excellent start with the registration form. I like the data you're asking for, and I think you really need it to get on with equitably allocating our limited natural recharge. Thank you. Mr. Panzer, you said one word that really hits home with me, equitable. That's what we're trying to be here, equitable, across the board to all pumpers.
I'll be short, Ron. Elaine Mead again. I'm a little confused because I thought I heard Jim say that you didn't have a list you could check off wells as they were registered. Then I think Mick just said, yes, we do have a list.
It's a partial list. It's not a complete list of all the wells within the basin. That's part of the problem, that we do have and we have utilized all the information that the county has. They provided it to the water resource manager. So we have been utilizing that, but it's not a complete list. And that's what I meant.
Okay, maybe what you could do to help expedite would be send certified letters requesting the registration. That way you know that those well owners got the letters, and that would expedite it a little bit, at least for the ones you know. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine.
Don Decker again. In looking at the registration form that's accompanying the proposed ordinance, I think the point that Skip made, I'll make it myself again. I think the form, at least in the beginning, needs to be as simple as possible. You're making contact. You're not going through an exhaustive possible listing of what that well owner knows about their well. I suggest that you take another look at the simplified well registration that was part of the voluntary effort that is on the website that the Domestic Well Owners Association had a large part in putting together. And it's closer to being a minimum description of what the well is, where it is, and what it's used for. I think the questions that are on the second page of this registration that accompanies the ordinance, all of that's interesting and nice, but unnecessary to get started. You'd stand a lot better chance of getting responses with the simplest form possible.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? Hearing none, I'll bring it back to the board. Is there any other comments, questions?
I have a comment I'd like to make to the board.
Please do. Turn your microphone on if it's not.
Okay. So,
there, okay.
Okay, speak into this. So, been through a few skirmishes where people with small wells, private wells in rural areas just really don't like giving up information. They think it's invasive. That's one reason they have that lifestyle. And I've got like 800 people, 800 homes like this that I represent in a essentially a battle for water rights between two Indian tribes and all the local residents. So essentially we represent the residential community. They have the same attitude. And so what we have to tell them is this, and I would say this too, people feel this is invasive. But if you look at what this board ultimately has to decide when we allocate production rights for some period of time or in some amount, is that the first issue is going to be how much, if any, more mining or depletion of the supplies in the basin is this board going to allow? Over what period is it going to allow it? Because you're not going to allow it forever, because that would deplete the resource. And that's one negative effect. So the other negative effect that we've talked about is how much of that mining and when is going to impact how many domestic wells, so that people who are harmed by that decision are going to be able to seek to have repairs, seek mitigation of the specific things, and the board equitably will be considering that. And that's going to be expensive, but if you don't, we have to predict that, and if you don't know the depth of the well, you don't know the perforations, the pumping elevation, you don't know any of that, it's really hard for the water manager to give us a really good prediction of what that destruction or harm is going to be. So people view this as something that's invasive and it's going to somehow harm them in and of itself, because they don't like to, and I understand that, they don't like to give up information, but this is information which ultimately will either protect them based on the board's decision or at least recognize the fact that they're going to have, if there aren't damages to them, they will be mitigated. So it's a very positive process for these small well owners if you look at it that way. And I've been in many meetings and I haven't heard anybody essentially just say it that way.
Thank you. Comments?
Thank you. Appreciate it. Mr. Decker, I agree with everything you said. Don't get me wrong. I think this is an invasion on their routines and their understanding of their water rights and what they have to do to almost can be viewed by many and will be viewed by many, especially here where we live, as an attack on their privacy. They have to surrender information to a new level of government that has to deal with revealing how much their precious use of water is and how that is going and why do they do that. And they're quickly going to get to understand that it's going to cost them money. Not only do they have to release that information, but it's going to cost them money. I also understand that efforts we've had historically at this board in contacting people has been, I wouldn't say fruitless, but very difficult. And it's going to continue to be difficult. And I have no false expectations personally that this effort is going to be immediately successful. I believe that this is a first step. It's a mandatory first step. We have to get information out. And what I really would appreciate personally, if you have solutions to helping us get better responses to these efforts. I'm interested in solutions and what we can do to improve things. I understand the one you offered was simplifying the form. I think it was you offered that. Maybe somebody else did. But if you have access to these people to explain the situation we're in and why we're doing what we're doing, I'm always available for your use in getting that information out to those people that live out in the county. So I'm just saying this, that I'm looking for solutions. And I understand the problems. I understand what you say, and I agree. But this is a process we have to initiate, have to follow through to get a proper accounting for our water budget.
Mr. Gleason, I appreciate exactly what you just offered, and thank you. The Domestic Well Owners Association has been participating in the GSA and the GSP process from the very beginning, as you know. And as a matter of fact, the postcard that just went out, we had a major part in putting it together. And the wording and the approach that was taken addressing the domestic well community was coming from our heart and from our contacts with that rural community. The fact that the response was so weak is simply evidence of the concern that community has. And what I said earlier is that community has been sensitized in a negative way by the outreach efforts that this board has made in their, I'll say, concerted and best effort. It's not that this board was trying to do something that was just kind of half-hearted, but they did not turn out very well. And once the sensitization exists, it makes it even harder. We are in contact with that community, but we're losing ground also because now we're regarded as part of the problem. We're acting as the board's spokesperson, if you will. We're part of the problem. That is the Domestic Well Owners Association. So I don't think there's a solution in the sense that you can write it down in a few words. And your comment that it's an ongoing effort, there's no question about that. The association fully appreciates that there is benefit, and the postcard has exactly 6 benefits that are very clearly spelled out in Mr. Markman's comments, that it really is to the advantage of those well owners. It's absolutely correct. However, the negative aspects, which are substantially emotional in their content, can't be erased by some logical arguments that are connected with the benefits that are there. People are in a pull back and put up the barricades kind of mode. I'm not saying, maybe I said it a little bit too strongly, but maybe I did it for emphasis. That's where we're at. And to get cooperation after this situation has evolved and grown, it gets harder and harder. I don't think there really is a simple solution, unfortunately.
Don, a quick question. How many people are in your association? How many well owners, roughly?
Well, you know, that's a very good question. We reach directly 300 some odd individuals. However, we know many of those are co-ops and four-way systems, and we know that our newsletters are going to a far broader audience. Furthermore, they're being posted regularly at the Inyakern hardware store, Herb Rizzardini's store, which is in effect an old-fashioned general store. And it's a communication route that is very effective, probably more effective than the emails. So how many are actually getting it? We're estimating that maybe 2/3 of the number, 500 some odd are getting it. It varies with, month to month. I run into people, and Judy and the other members of our inner circle run into people all the time that some are wanting to sign up, some don't. They don't want to have anything to do with us either. So.
Thank you. Please.
I realize that I'm out of order here.
No, you're not.
I'm a little shy.
That's okay.
But I have one brief comment to
Can you
make.
state your name, please?
Sarah Zegers,
Thank you.
Ridgecrest. And I have a brief comment about the form. And I think as a matter of respect to well owners, private well owners, if you would include a question, how much financial input have you put into the development and maintenance of your well facility? Because it's an awful lot. And I think that should be on the form, just out of respect to well owners. The water isn't free, as many people imagine, and the pumping isn't free. We pay Edison a great deal for that. So if you could include a financial question to that, that would be great.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other comments? The one comment, again, I want to make is that I think it's been said, is there's other people that are already in the process. It could be the ratepayer through the water district by fees they're getting. It's the pumping fees that are going on. So the whole idea, and Sigma says this is an entire basin. We need to treat everybody equitably and show everybody that we're treating equitably. So on the flip side of the coin, you could potentially have the people that are already, in a sense, registering their wells, the mutuals, the ag, the major pumpers, and including the users of their water, whether it be the district's ratepayers or the users on a municipal, questioning, well, why isn't everybody being treated equitably in the valley that does extract water? And I believe that goes to the issue as well, and I just wanted to make that point. Thank you. Any other comments?
Before we hear a motion, I just want to make sure that the exemption language is finalized and clear with regard to the helpful comment we received from a member of the public under Section 8. I'm just trying to wrap my head around how someone receiving water from a public purveyor, why they would even have a well.
Some do. I know there are district customers out there that have private wells, possibly at a different property, or even on the same property. So it is possible for somebody that receives water from the water district, for example, to have their own well.
Or maybe my question is better stated. Why would someone receiving water from a public purveyor also have a well? Or how would that water from the public purveyor be used through well pumpage?
Well, maybe I can help you with John. So
Sure.
Typically,
Microphone.
where I've seen this, somebody may be on a water system for potable water for their own internal use. They may have ornamental trees. They may have a small crop they're growing. They may have horses. And so you have small wells that cost less per unit to use and don't require potable standards for those other uses. And in rural, semi-rural communities, that's kind of, it's not unusual at all to see that.
So is there a need for this exemption?
The exemption applies to the federal government.
Well, I meant the addition, not the standing language.
It was just kind of thrown in front of me. I'll defer to Phil.
Phil Hall, County Counsel's Office. The exemption is in there in part because we removed private, and in part because how else do you define a situation where you have one well shared by 4 people, it sits on one person's property, they more or less maintain it and share the well. How do you get those 4 to register and not then also include the situation where you have 13,000 or whatever it is connections for the water district having to register because they use water district wells? That's the purpose of that exemption, is to ensure that if you are, well, this building right here will not have to register because it is using groundwater from the water district and the water district is registering the well.
I guess what you're saying is that this is mostly addressed towards cooperatives. In other words, rather than getting each person on the cooperative to register, just whoever is responsible for the well?
Well sharing, yes.
Okay,
Cooperatives
well sharing,
are usually the 4 to 14. But yeah, well sharing. This is really to get those well sharing, those de minimis users, to get them so we know where they are, who they are, and can address them properly in the GSP.
Let's see if I have my terminology correct. I've always considered a cooperative 4 wells or below and a mutual above, 5 and above.
Well,
is there
a mutual is a mutual benefit corporation,
right, okay.
And some people would call those cooperatives.
Well, okay.
Well, it's
all
technically a well sharing agreement, 4 or less.
So, do we have an answer to John of what we're going to leave the number 8 in, or?
Now I understand the purpose of this exemption. We're just trying to avoid redundancy. I'm just trying to avoid people playing games, getting around this registration ordinance because they. But perhaps we did that with the inclusion. Can you, Jim, if you could, please repeat the language about not having additional well pumpage? Or
Likewise, if you receive groundwater from a public purveyor and don't own an additional well, you do not need to register.
Thank you.
I closed public, but okay,
No,
Don.
this is for your benefit.
All right.
This is a clarification. There are a number of individuals who are receiving Indian Wells Valley Water District water who have a functional private well. This is a result of historical circumstance. And that private well is not connected, of course. There's backflow prevention to isolate it from the public system, the water district system. But there are 2 functional wells, and oftentimes the well itself is used exactly like Mr. Markman just described. It's a less costly source of water, and the water district water is the potable water that's used in the household.
Thank you. Any more comments, questions from the board? Jim, do we need to, you have 3 recommendations here. Are each of these to be taken as a vote independently?
No, I think we can do it as one in one motion.
Okay.
And do you want me to?
Yes, I would like you to go ahead and read what the motion
All
would
right.
be.
The motion is that the board makes a finding that the proposed ordinance is exempt from further environmental review pursuant to CEQA Guidelines Section 15378B5, as it involves administrative activities that will not result in direct or indirect physical changes in the environment. In addition, it's been determined that this action is exempt from further environmental review pursuant to CEQA Guidelines Section 15061B3 because it can be seen with a certainty that this action will not have a significant effect on the environment. The second requirement, and I guess you can authorize me to do this right now, is to introduce the ordinance by reading the title of it, which is ordinance number 01-19, establishing the regulations and procedures for the registration of all owners and users of groundwater extraction facilities within the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Basin. And the third action would be to waive reading of the entirety of the ordinance and set the second reading of the ordinance at the August board meeting. I'm not sure what date that is exactly, the 15th, I believe. The second reading would take place on August 15th. That's a board meeting.
Thank you.
And that would be the extent of it.
And the ordinance, of course, would be as amended today, as we discussed.
It will reflect all of the revisions that were authorized by the board. Yes.
Thank you. Do I hear a motion for that?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. I need a roll call vote, please. Jim?
You're not really adopting.
Oh, I'm sorry. We're
Just a regular vote. You're not adopting
just
the,
regular vote?
the
Okay.
resolution, the ordinance right now. So,
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? None opposed. Motion passes. Next is update on outreach efforts. I think in light of what's been going on here in the community, as about the only outreach there was is I took time to meet with the Chamber of Commerce during one of their morning sessions, and most of the interest there was from realtors. And I'll tell you that most of the questions were basically clearing up misunderstandings. Everything from the fact that if LADWP quits taking water, we'll flood down here. It's amazing how much misinformation is floating around out there, and I'm going to continue to do this. I'll be meeting again with the Rotary Club on the 24th, and if you haven't been to any of my, I really don't do a presentation. I just start out about what we are and what we're doing, and I give some examples of misinformation, and it sort of opens up the room to ask all kinds of questions, and that's what I'm looking for. So that's the extent of the outreach this past month. Things have been a bit shaky around here, to say the least. So if there's any comments or questions about that? None? We'll go ahead and move on to board questions regarding Policy Advisory Committee and Technical Advisory Committee reports. Anything from the board for the TAC and the PAC? Wow, you're sliding this time. Do you have anything for the board? Uh-oh.
No, I have no comments or any additional information to provide at this time.
Thank you.
No, I want to clarify one thing. I know you all read the report, and remember that was the week before the earthquakes.
Yeah, earthquakes,
and they're still going on to some degree. But the expectations were for the TAC and the PAC that day that we were going to receive some tasking directly related to the next potential management action modeling scenario. And we got late-breaking news that due to the legal issues surrounding what it appears might be the scope of what's being considered, that they were not going to be available that day, and they would be pending a special meeting of the attorneys group largely and staff that was going to take place on the 12th of July. And we were mobilized to be ready at that time, if so directed out of that meeting, to schedule immediate PAC meetings and I believe TAC meetings at that time, or should it not come out of that meeting, to come out of this meeting. And so the expectation is that the PAC and the TAC are going to receive some specific tasking today, likely after the closed session, and you saw some of the concerns with that expressed by the PAC. But that we are going to get some tasking, and we're standing by. We're ready to go. The question is whether it's our normal schedule or whether you have some urgency and would like us to get a special meeting before the next scheduled one 2 weeks from now to help with the schedule issues. So that's the expectation. Thank you.
Thank you. And that is the goal today, I believe. So any other comments or questions for the TAC or PAC from either the board or the public? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to the general manager's report.
Okay, my report will consist of an update on Capital Corps. Their report is in your packet, so I won't read that, but give you, if you will, an executive summary. Their activities during the month of June focused primarily on tasks 1 and 3 of the project scope. Under task 1, the Capital Corps Group is progressing on a technical memorandum. It's outlining the available water supplies within California for consideration of the board. They are on task to complete that report by the end of this month. Under task 3, the focus was on identification, availability, and eligibility of federal funding sources and programs. Direct contact was made with the U.S. House of Representatives, the U.S. Senate, the Department of Defense, and agencies of the Department of the Interior. The Groundwater Authority's project has been determined to be eligible for 5 existing federal programs with the possibility of an additional 3 programs pending further research. There are also 3 legislative bills that could impact the project. The Capital Corps Group met with the legislative sponsors of those 3 bills, coming away with no opposition to include the project within the other programs. Details of each of those legislative bills are in the project update report. Following direction and approval at the June 20th meeting, Capital Corps has initiated work on the application for the Bureau of Reclamation WaterSmart grant on behalf of the Groundwater Authority. They'll be working with Stetson Engineering to prepare the application, which is due July 31st. Focus during the month of July is on completion of the technical information memorandum and submittal of the WaterSmart grant application. They do anticipate things slowing down during August, so the billables should be less than we've been seeing the past 2 months. Todd Tatum is here as a representative of Capital Corps if you have any specific questions.
Todd, do you have anything you want to add to that report or clarify unless we have questions? I don't have any. Does the board have any questions or comments for Capital Corps? None? Anything from the public? I'll bring it back, Steve.
Renee West-Delusk from Ridgecrest. I just wanted to know, what are the chances of us actually getting any grant money from the WaterSmart?
Do you make odds?
Renee, I don't directly work on that, but my understanding is that, and after the meetings in D.C. that Jeff and Mike had, that we do have a real opportunity to get that grant. So,
thank you. Anything else on Capital Corps? Don, anything else in your report? Anything else go?
No.
That's it? All right. For then, we'll move on to item 8 that we moved down, Water Resource Manager Report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, we're back here. I'm back. It's good to see all of you again. I missed a meeting, and Judy pointed out that I said we canceled all vacations. She made it clear, but I clarified that I canceled my staff's vacations, not mine. So, and no, staff is not taking vacations. But anyway, we're back and we're busy. And based on what I'm being tasked to do today, this may be some punishment, but we'll find out how this all goes. I've got Jeff Helsley. You all know Jeff. He sat up here last month, and Heather Steele here. We've got a couple items on the agenda we want to cover first. They're pretty quick. And then I'm going to try, if I can, to walk through the best I can about where we've been and where we're going with our coordination with the board, special counsel, with the attorneys' meetings we've had, and all, where we're going in the near future. That I think there's been a lot of concern from PAC, TAC, and the public that you're not getting a lot of feedback, a lot of transparency of what's going on. Since the last board meeting, there's been a lot of discussion about getting that message out. And frankly, I've got about 3 pages to walk through my notes. It was put together on the drive up here primarily from last night on the drive up. So So I'm going to work through it the best I can. If I stumble a little bit, I apologize, but there has not been a huge amount of preparation. Only good thing is that since we're actively hands-on involved in this, a lot of it's in my head. It doesn't have to be a bunch of notes in a presentation. But anyway, so the first thing we're going to do is have Jeff and Heather are going to, I think, cover the A and B items. By the way, Jeff and Heather are here for those items, and so you know why they're here. We do have closed session, and Heather, I know Heather does. We have some items in closed session that they're here for also. So I have that. Last thing I want to say before we start is just recognize. I want to do that really quick. Just recognize the fact that there was some very, very serious earthquakes up here, and we all know that. And I was able to reach out. I was able to communicate with some of the people up here that we work with, and just to let you know, we've only been working up here for a year or so, but we feel like it's family, and it's good that we stay in touch, and we're glad that generally everybody's pretty much okay. So I want to make sure you guys know all that. So we'll go to the first item, which is the poem, and this is going to be interesting also. Go ahead, Jeff.
I don't have an update of the poem for you today. As I've reported previously, we've been working with legal counsel and the board about looking where things are at and trying to move forward. You've seen some of the modeling results from those discussions. I think we're starting to see a path forward. We'll be talking to the board about that today. I think we're in a position after today. I believe we will be in a position to put together a revised schedule. If that is the case and things are the way that I see them going, we think we are still in a position to put together the GSP by the deadline. Some of the things that have previously been in the POAM, like a 90-day public review process, will need to get revised. There still will be, chapters to the PAC and the TAC. There still will be a complete document with a public review. It'll just be shorter than the 90-day. And we're also considering, at this point, once we have clarity on the schedule, a revised schedule that maybe doesn't follow the POAM format quite as strictly, because there's a lot of information in there that I think people want to see at this point, a clear path about where we're going. So that's what I have to report at this time.
Okay. So that's it on the poem. One of the concerns with the poem is it is expensive. It's very detailed. We have it there with sort of I'm just going to call it sort of the impasse over the last several months we've been working on about where we're going. It hasn't been updated, which we've saved money on that, but we certainly don't want to waste time and money bringing the poem up to speed with all the work that it takes to put it all together and get all the detail that's needed there when we're looking at, 4 or 6 months of kind of wrapping things up on the GSP. So we'll work on that with the board and get some direction on what to do next as far as the poem and schedule.
Good. I'll give an update now on the Prop 1 invoicing and our status with that. The board knows, but perhaps the public doesn't know, we did receive payment for invoice number 1 last month on June 26th for the full amount of $335,000 approximately. So that was good news. Invoice number 2 has already been submitted to DWR on June 13th is when we submitted the first draft. We just received comments this Monday, very minor comments, so that was good news. That was part of the whole effort we did with going through the first invoice of getting the process down and getting everything in the format that they want to see and what we can provide them. So these are very minor comments. We should be getting the redraft back to them tomorrow, and that would, I anticipate, be the final back and forth with them on this, so they should be able to then approve that and put it out to their finance staff for approval of that. Invoice number 3, we anticipate submitting a draft in August. That'll cover the next 3-month period, which is April through June of 2019. So we're back on track of submitting invoices relatively soon after that 3-month period closes. Any questions on that?
I guess if there's any questions on A and B, either for the board or the audience, before I go to what I'm going to do today.
Good luck.
So we're ready? Okay. All right. Well, here we go. I mentioned I've got Jeff and Heather here, and I asked Jeff and Heather, you don't have to get up right now, but as you feel the need, maybe you get up to the podium. I want to make sure, I talked to them ahead of time. I want to make sure that if I miss something or it doesn't appear to be clear from them, if I get out of my lane, then they can correct me and they can jump in at any time. So I told them that. Also, special counsel, Jim Markman's here. Some of the things that we're talking about are at least being guided to a certain extent by Jim's work and Jim's help on the allocations and how we go forward on this stuff. So Jim, and same thing I said, Jim, if I miss something or you want to clarify something, just stop me. That'd be good. I could probably use a break because I got a lot to do here. And then, and finally, with the board, I know that the board is very interested in this. We've talked to the board. The board's got a lot of concerns about making sure, to the extent possible, especially now, that information gets out to the PAC-TAC and the public about where the board and the water resources manager and the GSP is going and where we're headed and what we're trying to get done. So either during the presentation or certainly afterward, we're going to expect certainly comments from the board and questions or comments from the audience that we can do the best we can to respond to. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to go back a little bit about where we've been and then kind of get to where we are and then to describe where we're looking at going, over the next couple of months. So as I mentioned before, the PAC, the TAC, and the public have been waiting for this for some time. A little bit of transparency, and we totally, I know the board does, and we certainly understand the concerns because there's been I don't want to use a word like frustration, but we understand that there's been concerns with folks about understanding where things are going. I will tell you this, it's not for a lack of effort, of thought, and discussion by the board that this hasn't come before you. There's been a lot of work by the board. It has been bounced back and forth between the board, between our 4 legal counsels, staff, our office, bounced around a lot. A lot of work's been going on how we pull all this together. So I want to let you know that this hasn't been taken lightly. It's just taken some time to pull it all together. So, in general, I want to do kind of an initial statement before I get into this stuff, that I think you're all aware that because we've talked about this before, the whole concept of continuing the amount of overdraft that has been pumping from this basin in the past few years and the projections going forward, the whole concept of doing that, along with the idea that we might be able to create, going forward, technical support or whatever you want to call it, for a soft landing at another location in the basin as far as water level depths and storage. So the whole concept of continuing an overdraft and then trying to build in a soft landing where we end up at some significantly lower water level with impacts, but the whole idea that we do something like that has been determined by the board, and I think I've presented it at TAC meetings, I've presented it here. It's determined to be pretty much unacceptable. We can't do that. That's not going to work, and there's lots of good reasons for that. I'd actually had this a little later, but it seems like it might be a good place to do it right now. We had mentioned in the past some of the reasons for that, and we've done it at the PAC, and we've done it at the TAC, and we've done it here. And I'm just going to read it because we presented it as part of a presentation. So the primary policy question to decide how much loss of groundwater in storage is considered significant and unreasonable, which is a sigma term that we deal with. And that's the primary policy question. And the things to consider when defining significant and unreasonable loss of storage, and I'm just going to list some things so you're all aware. Groundwater resources are deemed the primary encroachment concern issue for the Navy China Lake. We're all aware of that. This is setting aside the earthquake issues. This happened before that. You all saw the letter. Everybody became aware of the fact that the China Lake facility clearly expressed their concerns about their groundwater supply in support of the base's mission. So that was a key item. Cost to mitigate secondary impacts related to loss of storage, shallow wells going dry, relocation of wells due to water quality issues, etc., is another big concern, is we can't live with these kinds of impacts going forward. Nick Panzer raised it from one of the first meetings I came here, and it's back on top. Well, as one of the big issues is maximum beneficial uses of available water. Is what are the maximum uses of available water, beneficial uses of water, and we have to make sure we address those. The uncertainties in trying to do what we're doing, these are the uncertainties that we're dealing with right now in trying to do this. We still have general basin and model uncertainties. The basin uncertainties, we have technical reports, we have a lot of information, we have a lot of very, very smart people helping us. We're looking at these reports, we're doing the best we can to pull it together. We're not doing any real new technical studies on the basin. We're using existing information, existing resources. We are using the model that was provided to us. We've upgraded the model. All of that work, all of the work with the other studies, all of the work with the model have gone through the TAC to make sure everybody is on board. So there has been a lot of work with the TAC to get us where we are today. But the reason why I put it under uncertainties is because we still have uncertainties about how this basin works and how accurate the model is, the results it gives us going forward on how to manage this basin. So there are uncertainties. I think we're in darn good shape compared to other basins. There's a lot of information out there, but there are still uncertainties going forward when we're talking about drawing water out of our storage, out of our reserves. The other uncertainty we've listed is the future expansion of the Navy mission. Clearly, the Navy has Federal Reserve rights. Those reserve rights are not quantified. They haven't quantified them. Probably won't quantify those. If there is a reason for the Navy to increase their need for a groundwater supply for the base's mission, they're going to do it. There's an uncertainty that we have going forward trying to plan a project, trying to plan a sustainability, trying to develop a sustainability plan. There's an uncertainty there where the base might be in the future. We've gotten good information from the base. We understand what they're thinking. It makes sense. But realistically, everything could change very quickly in the future. So another reason why there's uncertainty related to our groundwater supply and our reserve storage. There's always been the concern about climate change impacts. We know what we've done in the past. There's a lot of information out there about how we should address climate change in the future. I'll be honest with you, none of it's very good. Okay? All we know is that it's probably going to be wrong. We do the best we can to address it, but it's probably going to be wrong. It's not going to be right. The other uncertainty, another very large uncertainty, is imported water available in timeline. We've recognized and we've expressed here many times that for this community to continue anywhere near the way it is today in the city, in the Ridgecrest and this basin, some form of supplemental imported water is going to be required. It's just a fact of life. It's just the way it is right now. Imported water and the availability and timeline for imported water is a definite uncertainty, and the idea that you might continue to mine your reserve storage with that level of uncertainty, I think we have real concerns about it, just being from the technical side, from the engineering, the water resources manager side. We have real concerns about it. I know your board has major concerns about approaching it that way. And the last one is, which is it's still a big one, is the impacts on the groundwater dependent ecosystems. It's a part of SGMA. We are dealing with it, and we will have to deal with it. So I'm just reviewing in general why it's so important that we look at the amount of basin storage that we believe we have right now based on the technology we have. We call it the reserve storage. We look at our plan going forward, and a real effort be made to try and, for the community, for your community, try to conserve as much of that basin storage as we can as we develop the sustainability plan. So that gives you a little bit of background on where we've kind of been. I'll let you know that we did start with a lot of existing studies, the existing model which was updated. I'm following my notes, so sometimes I might go forward on my brain, but then my notes take me back. So if there's some overlap, that's because I'm going back and forth. Existing model, the update. Again, I want to say again because it's been very, very helpful. We had a steep learning curve. Some of your folks in the audience will probably tell you we had a steep learning curve. But we've learned a lot from the knowledge that's here. There's a lot of people that have a lot of very good knowledge about this basin and about how things work here. So that's been very helpful. But I do want to make sure you understand that we, other than the model and evaluating things the way we've done and working with you folks and the smart people here, we haven't really done any real new technical studies. We haven't drilled any new wells yet. We don't have any new hydrogeologic information. We haven't even run a pump test yet. We haven't done anything new in this basin. We're pulling the information together to try to develop this plan. Okay? And all of that work, as I mentioned before, because I got following my notes, all of that work has been going through the TAC, the PAC, and the board as much as we possibly can. Something occurred several months ago when we got the model ready to run. We decided to run what we call a baseline run. Okay, in order to run that baseline, to model that baseline run, we worked through the TAC and to a certain extent through the PAC. But one of the goals was to look at the existing pumping, talk to the major pumpers. We obviously didn't talk to the de minimis guys and everybody, but talk to the major pumpers and get as much information as we could from the pumpers in this basin on what they're pumping now, what they're using it for, and what they expect to pump in the future. So our baseline model was basically prepared around those concepts directly from you folks, the pumpers. We had some numbers that we thought were kind of high estimates of future pumping that were not, probably not sustainable, but we used them because that's the information we got. We actually took the information we got on pumping back to the folks, the TAC committee, the TAC, at least once and more than once to say, are you sure you want to run these? Everybody said yes, so we ran those. In running that baseline model, I think a lot of you folks that have been coming, a lot of the folks are the same people here, you saw it when we presented it. It was a bit of what I call a wake-up call. It was a bit of, oh my gosh, people have been telling us we have 2,000 years of reserve water. People have told us we have 500 years. Based upon the model that we put together in front of the TAC, based upon the model we were given and upgraded to use for this, based upon the information given from the pumpers, baseline model run was pretty much a wake-up call. A lot of concerns. It basically, in general, it basically showed that continuing what we're doing, okay, with the amount of water we believe we have in storage, there's going to be a basin depletion that's going to affect your ability to get water out of this basin with the existing infrastructure, right? There's things down there we don't know, but what we do know is how far the wells go and where the water is from the data that we do have. But that baseline model was a wake-up call. Several board members had major concerns with that model run, what it showed. It showed 50 to 60 years. The model basically collapsed on itself and said, based upon what you've given me in the model, the basin infrastructure, the basin structure and the basin infrastructure, the wells, where they pump from, it basically said, the model, we can't continue to meet the demands that you're asking the model to run with this infrastructure. So it means the model kind of crashed. You would have to actually do some significant improvements to go deeper. So it was a wake-up call. It talked about taking out somewhere on the order of 1.5 million acre feet of water, and there were very significant shallow well impacts, which we documented and brought back to the TAC. So that's what we did to kind of a baseline run. And it's important to have the baseline run. We've debated internally back and forth how important that is for the GSP. And it will be in the GSP one way or other, but I think it's very important for DWR to see where this community could have gone without a GSP. So it's important to show them what level of improvements we're talking about, what level of conservation and changes are looking to be made in order to try to achieve sustainability. So it will be a part of the GSP. We then ran a couple of sustainability model runs and presented those concepts. We actually created, through the TAC, we actually created an ad hoc modeling committee of the representatives on the TAC. We actually worked through the TAC and the ad hoc committee to develop the model runs, what we wanted to run. We took input from everybody, and we actually developed the model runs. We ran those with our modeling subcontractor, DRI. We ran those twice, and then we brought the results back and reviewed the results back. And so that was all done under our normal processing schedule of taking our anticipated planning process to the TAC for technical review before we actually made model runs. That's what we did. And it seemed to work out fine. Around about that time, and this is where I'm bringing in Special Counsel Markman, around about that time, it was determined that it was an appropriate time for us to start doing attorneys meetings, or attorneys allocation meetings. And Jim was very instrumental in pulling those together. Sometimes you regret what you do. I asked to be a part of those, so they said, sure, you need to be there. Then they said I had to be there. And what I learned from being in those, I learned a lot from being in those. I say that I think those meetings were very, very helpful. I think they were very helpful to go through that process. I learned a lot through that process. It's very good. But what I sort of came away from in that process was that we needed to make sure, because everybody was engaged there, plus we were engaged on the technical side, we were engaged in the modeling. What I brought back from those attorneys' meetings is, and I reported to the board, and we reported to the TAC meeting, is our goal now is to try and try to get the coordination between those attorneys' allocation meetings and the major pumpers, and what kind of a plan we can work with them going forward, and with the technical work on the impacts to the basin. We got to try to marry those up in order to make the plan work. And I mean, in the perfect world, I mean, the goals that we had, and in a perfect world, we would have developed something acceptable to the pumpers in the allocation, the major pumpers in the allocation meetings. And had we done that, I want to assure you, the outreach would have gone out to the other pumpers. We didn't have a lot of the small pumpers, the farmers there, and we didn't have de minimis folks, but we did have most of the other major pumpers. And had we able to get a plan together that made sense, we would have expanded it out, and then we would have run it through the model runs and pulled it together and brought it to the board as a plan, as a package that made sense to everybody. That would have been a perfect world. We ran into a bit of an impasse at the attorneys' meetings. Those meetings were based upon a lot of guidance from Special Counsel Markman on Sigma and on basic water rights and water rights allocation and self-help pumping and all the concepts that go into that. And it sort of developed a concept around pumping that occurred between 2010 through 2014 as being 5 years prior to Sigma, that this is how we're basing a lot of our pumping information and trying to move forward on who's going to pump going forward and how much. So those attorneys' meetings, while they were very, very helpful, as far as providing an answer that we could take to our technical folks and develop the model runs, and model run a successful, effectively a negotiation, they weren't very, very productive. We didn't get there. We called it, what it was kind of an impasse. And we ended up having to say, okay, we're going to stop. We need to go back to the board and talk to the board. And that's what we did. We came back and talked to the board and told the board where we were at, walked through the concerns that we had, that everyone had with the attorneys' meetings, walked through where we're at from the technical approach. We brought it back to the board. And I think from the PAC and TAC standpoint, I think from the public standpoint too, I think that was kind of a bit of a, it wasn't like a right turn, but a little of a turning point on our ability to actively and productively work hand in hand with the TAC and to a certain extent the PAC on where we were going, what we were doing. Because frankly, I think everybody had to regroup because we couldn't bring the parties together, so we had to look to the board to get some more direction on where do you want to, here's where we want to go, here's the issues. And frankly, I started with the issue. The major concern at the board at that point was the issue on reserve storage. And all the things I just went through at the beginning on the reasons why there's major concerns with depleting reserve storage. That was the major driving force in our discussions with the board on where do we go from here moving forward to try to develop model runs and develop a GSP. So that's what we did. We actually presented all kinds of alternatives, but through work with the board, we developed, and you guys will recall, the folks that have been involved will recall this, we developed 3 model runs, and we presented as, they've got 3 model runs from the board, and they were kind of bookended model runs on impacts, fairly significant to about as minimal as we think we can do. And we actually made those model runs. We presented the concept. We did present those concepts to the TAC, but I think the major change that you folks saw was that rather than bringing these concepts to the TAC through an ad hoc committee and taking input on what we're going to do, we basically brought it to the TAC and said, this is what we're doing, and we'll bring you the results. And I've got to believe the TAC appreciated at least that part of it, but we frankly we have direction and we don't have time. We had to keep moving. So we brought the model runs to the TAC and said, this is what we're running. This is generally the reasons why we're doing it, and then we're going to run them and bring back the results, which we did. We rated the model runs. We developed impacts, primarily shallow well impacts for all the runs. Okay. We discussed the model run results with the board and the TAC, all of the results. Based upon review of those model runs, one of the model runs was pretty much determined, and I'm not going to go into the details about the model runs because there's a certain sensitivity in what we call them and all that, but one of the model runs we determined the impacts were pretty much unacceptable, so we moved to the other two, and then it kind of generally then focused down to one of the model runs that we run, around generally model run number 3, which, if those of you who remember it. At that point, we started our work on preparing a refined run for the model run that we felt was most supportable and was most most acceptable by the board. We started to develop a refined model run for some of the concerns that we had with the results. Things like we still had, even though we moved pumping around, we still had some pumping hole problems. We had some areas that were lower than others. So we wanted to refine it and move some pumping around so that we could balance the pumping and maybe make the basin actually balance a little better as we move forward under those pumping scenarios. So as part of...
Steve?
Yes.
I'm sorry. You're on a roll. I hate to stop you.
That's okay.
You're doing good. I just wanted a correction. You had mentioned we kind of focused around model run 3. It was model run 4.
Oh, model run 4. Okay.
That'll be significant.
You're right. There was 3,
when people
4,
start
5.
looking at the model runs.
Oh, sorry.
Significant.
Model run 4. Because we're working on 6 now. That was 5 and 6. You're correct. So when we developed that model run, we were still working on, when we started to develop the refined model run, we were still working on pretty much the same concept of the model run, but refining certain things to try and minimize the impacts. We brought that back to the board, and at that point, we got in from, we talked to the board about how this should go. And Jim was involved. I think some of the recommendations came from Jim. I know Mick had some thoughts about how we do all this. They generally involved, like I mentioned, the 2010 to 2014 pumping, and generally involved some kind of implementation period, generally some kind of a ramp down to get down to not sustainability, but some kind of an acceptable level of reasonable level of overdraft that then results in a fairly acceptable level of overdraft until we get imported water. And if we don't get imported water, then there have to be another drastic cut, which is the doomsday scenario I mentioned before, where our pumping is only allowed to the sustainability pumping of 76 or 8,000 acre feet, and the community isn't the same. So that was generally the concept. We were going to refine that for impacts and rerun that model run. As part of that, some new concepts were put on the table. And this is where I'm getting into. I've done enough of the past now. Now we can tell you where we're at and kind of where we're going. So it was a new concept that was developed, and I mentioned Jim and Mick definitely, and Ron definitely being involved in it.
So Steve, don't go where we haven't talked to the board about it.
Yeah.
So don't.
Okay.
So that the one that the really refinement.
Right.
That's going to be discussed today.
Yeah.
I don't think we should.
Okay, I'm only going to give general concept.
Okay, maybe we'll stay very general.
Okay, very general. Very general, okay, because there's no numbers here today. But Jerry,
nothing's been authorized by the board to go in that direction yet.
Yeah,
so.
okay. You stop me. Sometimes I say too much. You guys know. I just go. We got stuff to do. Yeah, we're trying to get this done. So one of the concepts that was developed as a potential alternative concept that we're working on right now is, rather than the ramp down, the implementation ramp down for the pumpers was, first of all, the concept of in order to continue pumping going forward with the implementation of the GSP and under the authority of the board, you have to have documented pumping in the period of 2010 2014. So there's an initial cut right there, and there's an implementation approach to that the board will have to deal with as far as who's pumping going forward. Now, as I mentioned, there's an implementation period and a ramp down for those that are in that category. And the other concept would be, rather than do that, because it looks like it would be difficult for especially ag to do something like that. that maybe what we ought to do is take a look at the amount of water that we were looking at being pumped by the ag folks, small ag, large ag, all ag, the amount of water being pumped by the ag folks during that ramp down period to where they ramp down to where it doesn't make sense to pump anymore. Pull that all those numbers together, that quantity of water together. This is a gross quantity of water, and sort of create a category of water that would be ag pumping to allow to be pumped. Would be somehow, we haven't done it yet, would be allocated to all of the pumpers based on some criteria, and allow those pumpers, those ag pumpers, to continue to pump using the water they needed for a period of time until the water's gone. So in effect,
at their choice.
At their choice. In effect, no worse impacts to the basin than the ramp down, because we're pumping the same amount of water, but turn it over to the ag folks to figure out where they're going to pump and how soon they're going to pump. For modeling purposes, we have to make our own assumptions to model that, but that was the concept. So as I mentioned, that would include only 2010, 2014 pumpers. How we would pull that all together, we're still working on that to get that out to everybody, but that's what we would do. In addition to that, the actual pumping that would occur from the beginning of the GSP going forward, focus is going to be on this concept, would be on maximum beneficial uses. So we're looking at domestic, municipal, the maximum beneficial uses of water would continue to pump based upon their 2010, 2014, what they need to pump based upon going forward. And we've got some estimates of what they need to pump. In addition to Navy's Federal Reserve rights, they're going to continue to pump too. And we total all that up, that totals up to around 11 or 12,000 roughly total pumping that would occur that is exclusive of ag. So you would basically have a concept where ag would have a big bundle of water that they would pump over a period of time. We're looking at most likely it would be less than 10 years, and that water would be gone based on what we're just looking at for the ag pool of water. The other.
That's a hypothetical. Informed guess. Right?
Yes, an informed guess. We haven't talked to anybody. The rest of the maximum beneficial use and the Navy Reserve right pumping would continue. The idea is that we've tried to come up with a level of pumping for the community to sustain the way the community lives today. Sort of a sustainable pumping to keep the community reasonably the way it is today, with the anticipation that imported water will arrive. If imported water arrives in sufficient quantities, 3,000 to 5,000 acre feet a year, then the pumping will continue, and that water will be brought in to bridge the gap between our sustainable local water supply, 76 to 75, 800, 8,000 acre feet, between that and the actual pumping. So we're actually having a little bit of a fairly minor amount of continued overdraft until we get imported water. But frankly, and this is just trying to tell you the logic and the strategy, frankly, it doesn't make sense to ramp everybody down to 7,600, bring in imported water, and then try to ramp the pumping back out. It doesn't make sense. There's got to be an approach that actually works for the community. So that's the concept we've kind of pulled together.
So, Steve, one other thing. We're only
Sure.
talking about local, naturally occurring water. We're not talking about supplemental water. If some large agricultural interest or anybody else that wants to survive this is going to run out of their allocation, and they can put supplemental water in here to meet their needs or be part of a group that does that, including the water district, that's another alternative.
Yeah.
If they want to get behind that, can pay for it. So we're talking about the safe yield. We're talking about the natural safe yield and how it's allocated.
Yep.
So some of these projects we've heard about, should they ever come to life, brackish water, other projects.
Yep.
I just got a call on that yesterday.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true.
If they revive something like that and create another supply,
Yep.
that changes things for the better, but we haven't seen that.
Okay, so that is conceptually where we're headed. I'll tell you, folks, for the TAC 2, Adam's not here, for the TAC 2 and the PAC also, but we're getting some additional guidance. We are preparing model run number 6, the refined model run number 4, right now. We're hoping to even have results back for that model run for the TAC and PAC meeting. For sure, we will be able to go through the model run, and we're hoping we should have at least some preliminary model results back at the PAC and the TAC meeting. So we will be coming to you guys with some information based upon this, as long as the board's good with where we're headed. But I think they are. I think we are in good shape. So that's where we're headed right now. That's the coordination, and hopefully the re-engagement and everybody come back together at the next PAC and TAC meeting. We all move forward based upon where we think we are, where the board has kind of guided us, and where we put this together as an implementation, as at least an approach for an implementation plan, calling it a GSP. Okay, so that's kind of where we are right now. I have one other thing, and I don't want to bore you, but a lot of work was put into this. So I have just a statement I want to read. I can put it in the record for the minutes, so it's in the minutes. I don't. Do you think there's anything in here that we need to cover? I think you pretty much covered it. Okay. We work with legal counsel. This is kind of last minute stuff, and we work with legal counsel. I can name any names, Jim. But we work with legal counsel to try to come up with a statement today. And in the process, while working on the statement, we were driving up here and working with my guys, and we were actually laying out, the outline of what I wanted to say. So there's overlap, but I didn't want to completely eliminate the fact that a lot of work went into a statement too. Which it did. So I think that's all I have. Unless there's questions of the board, I'd be happy to answer questions of the board. Jeff, Heather, did I cover it? Apparently not.
No, I think it came across in what you presented, and I applaud you. That was better than our rehearsal. But one, the key, there are a number of key turning points. The impasse in the allocation meetings was certainly one of them. And one of the big things why we turned to the board is, since we weren't able to work things out in the allocation meetings, then the threat of litigation becomes more prominent, and that has to be considered by the board. That's not something that the TAC or the PAC can do independent. That's a board process.
Thank you. Anything from the board, or Mr. Markman, you have anything to add? No. Any questions or comments from the board before I turn over to the public? Wow. I thought there'd be all kinds of questions for you.
I did too.
It looks like your hands were getting tired too.
Yeah. Sorry.
Pretty much over. As I interpret, what you said is basically the big decision is based on what we're going to accept as an acceptable depletion of our reserves. Correct. All right, and that number is still to be determined.
To be determined, yes.
Right.
We're close. I'm just not ready to talk about it today. I think we will be talking about it soon, though, yes.
Okay.
I want to make sure we're all on the same page.
All right, that's the main thing. Thank you. Anything else? I'm not doing public yet. Would you like me to go to public first? Do you have any questions? Open to the public then, please. Any comments?
Nick Panzer. Clarification to Jim and Steve. I think you mentioned it, but my question has to do with, let's say we get to 2035 and there is, for the sake of my question, no supplemental water. We have 7650. Would I be correct in assuming that the GSP would anticipate that it's at least a possibility, and in the GSP specify how that water would be allocated come 2040? Does that question make sense, or would you like me to restate it?
I'll start, Jim, because there's a legal side of it. That's correct. I did mention that if we don't get imported water in, then there's got to be a decision made on the ability to continue the overdraft. We will be learning qualification. We will be learning a lot between now and then. So obviously we've got a lot of monitoring. We got a lot of basin impacts to look at. But writing the GSP this time, yes, I think the approach, the DWR is going to be looking for sustainability, and we're obviously not going to bring imported water on a silver plate as part of this GSP to DWR. So they're gonna know that we're putting a plan together that is betting on getting imported water. So in the event it doesn't happen, we'll need to show in the GSP what we're going to do in the event it does not happen. Yes.
Well, I'm not sure we need to show that going in. You have to show a substantially viable plan to bring in X amount of imported water at some point to balance. to sustainability. And that's out there a number of years. As we approach it and we're not getting there, we have to keep updating that plan. There will come a day, if we're not getting there, where that last 3,000 or 4,000 acre feet is going to have to be lopped off in some way. And it may be more than that by now, because we don't know about any kind of economic expansion in the city or on the naval base particularly, which is not something we have control over.
Okay. So I think you've answered it, but I want to stay with it just a little longer. What I hear you saying, Jim, is it is not necessary by January 2020 to specify what would happen, under the scenario where there is no import. We can wait, and the DWR is likely to accept that under the SGMA legislation and regulations, so that we can defer having to tell them this is what that allocation.
If this doesn't work, we do Plan B, which is might be a really dramatic conservation program. I don't think we have to say that
up front
when we put that first plan in. However, we can't just say, well, we're going to find imported water. You have to say a whole lot more about it for it to meet the.
I totally agree with that. Thank you.
Joshua Nugent for Mojave Pistachios and Nugent Farms. Just a couple of kind of positive comments is I appreciate Steve guaranteeing us 10 years of water in front of the attorneys. So thank you for that.
It just got fired.
But no, really, I do want to say that the main thing is when you have a business and you're trying to decide, do you get new tractors, do you buy your employees 1 or 3 year insurance, things like that. Getting a little bit of a glimpse of the closed door discussions that you guys are having is helpful, because what we're trying to do is figure out, how long we're going to be in this valley. It sounds like, there's been some pretty significant changes in maybe how you're going to do that. And so one of the things I'm hoping for going forward is we'll get a little more glimpses, like, when do we think we'll get to see the management thresholds and objectives? What are the mechanisms you guys foresee to, if you decide on a number of acre feet of production, how do you get from here to there? Some of the details on that will be helpful. And then another thing is how much is this water going to cost? Because that's another, whenever you're a farmer, you're trying to plan things, telling someone they have an X number of years of water, the water costs $1,000 an acre foot. That doesn't do anything for you because you're already out of business before you started. So those are some of the details that appreciate that sounds like that we're getting towards that point. And then as a PAC member, I'd also like to say that it'd be nice to have the PAC and TAC meetings be useful, and that, I know we're talking about $10,000 and $12,000 amounts and all that, maybe you spend $5,000 and have someone from Stetson at a PAC or TAC meeting in the next couple of months. So appreciate it.
If I could, one thing I want to mention, which I didn't mention, Jim and I didn't mention, this is for Josh especially, for the ag guys. We are looking at transferability within that pool. So there is we're anticipating the ability that if somebody has a better use for water, they could transfer from somebody else. So that's at least being talked about.
But you're not going to state a price, right?
No details. No details. We're considering it, I say.
Market driven.
Renee West-Delusk. Steve, when you were giving your summary, were you also trying to, I don't know if you were saying this or not, that each allocation group can find other supplemental water at their discretion or on their own expense?
I think, I didn't really cover that, but as far as I'm concerned, that's always open, yes.
Okay.
Camille Anderson from Cyril's Valley Minerals. You did not mention industrial users.
Yes, that's a good question. Adam was gone when I was doing that, so I thought I could eliminate it. I didn't know you were here. We're working on Cyril's. We are working on it right now for the concepts we've got. We've got them in one of the categories, but we've also got some information that we're still reviewing about Cyril's history, their historic pumping and stuff. So more work is being done with Cyril's. I know that there is discussion, concern that Cyril just needs to continue to be viable, so that is on the table. I can't give you more details than that right now, but yes.
The subpart of Searles that is essentially a municipal supplier is put in the same category as the water district, for example. The actual industrial operation water is put in the ag category, subject to some discussions that have been going on, and I've also been involved in discussions with Searles' attorney and others trying to deal with the Searles supplier. So people are all actively working on it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Derek Hoffman from Meadowbrook Dairy, and there's a lot that was just presented, and I too appreciate the additional transparency, if you will. But that is a lot of information to present all at one time after months of closed meetings. So I guess at this point I'll just say we'll continue to watch. Thank you.
Any more public comment? Bring it back to the board for any comment or questions for Steve before we go into closed session. With this, I'll go ahead and open up for closing comments. So, Commander, would you like some?
Yes, I have something. I'd like to provide a quick update on the Section 313 funding from the NDAA and just let folks know that our land subsidence project is at the Secretariat level right now for consideration, and also to let folks know that there is a possibility for 3 other projects coming here to deal with energy. One would allow us to use our solar array during an extensive power outage out off the grid there. And the other one has to do with our control systems for our utilities, adding some cybersecurity and some additional efficiencies to those controls. And the other project deals with replacing a 16-inch water main as part of our production system. So I just wanted to let everybody know on those, and hopefully we'll hear something soon.
Thank you. Scott?
No further comments.
Director Gleason?
Yes, a couple real quick. First of all, thanks for that presentation, Steve. That was really thorough, really difficult, but it shows the effort you and your team and this board and this community has all jumped in together to try to get to a place that no one wants to be. But we need to make difficult, sometimes dramatic decisions, and we're poised to do that. I also appreciate your comments about family, and we feel the same way. I mean, we feel that the effort you've put in here has been above and beyond what I had expected. And when you talk, I know you have really fleshed out completely all aspects of your thought, and I'm speaking on behalf of Kern County, I'm very thankful that you've done that. Thanks a lot. I want to talk just a quick second about transparency, because that's a keynote of who we are, what we've done, and what we've tried to do. There have been moments where we have entered, because of the numbers of the earlier runs, we have entered places where we have had no choice but to make decisions based on primarily legal issues. I mean, we try to always, and we've done a good job of keeping the technical, keeping the policy, and keeping the legal balanced. In the past, recent time, several weeks, we've had to focus on legal issues, and we've been guided primarily by legal capabilities and what's legal and what's not legal. When you talk about Federal Reserve rights, when you talk about water rights, when you talk about reasonable and beneficial use, those are heated topics, and they need to be guided by precise legal counsel. And that's what we've done, and that's what we've tried to do. We are making every effort we can to get as wide a berth of information to poor words. We're trying to get as much information to you as frequently as best we can. And we will continue to do so. And we are available always for your personal comments or thoughts afterwards at any time. So I had a lot of comments, but Steve, you covered most of it, and I'm sure I'll be following up on thoughts, and I'm available for conversations with any of you, anybody in the public, anytime about this issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. John? Any comments? Nothing? Bob?
I'm going to
sorry, I'm going to follow up what Mick said. You know, it's been very difficult when you start looking at this whole project because we were so far in the hole. When you look at what the recharge is versus the use, it becomes almost, I won't say nothing's impossible to solve technically, but then money begins to get in the picture. We're a small community. Anything that costs a great deal of money to say, let's bring another 20,000 acre feet in or 30,000 acre feet, as a community, we can't afford it. There's just no way. We can't bear the cost on the number of individuals and the entities that are in this community. So yes, the decision has been very, very difficult. Taking into account legal rights, beneficial use, it all has to meld together. So, and because the problem is so big that we can't literally buy our way out of this. It can't happen. And I also want to take a comment that, in light of what's happened recently with the earthquakes in the area, it's made me realize what a great community this is, how much we pull together, we work together to make things happen. I think we respect each other. I think we want to help each other. And I think we all want to pitch in together to make us a successful community and a great place to live. And I truly learn to appreciate that. And that's all I have. Anything else before I move us into closed session? I'll close the open session, and if we can, we'll take 10 minutes to convene and close. Thank you.